Hello and welcome to the Silent Evil Podcast. I'm Spencer Scott Holmes.
And I am Cameron.
And we are coming at you to a 2015 survival horror-like game. It almost reminds me it's in like that Myst style, where you sort of, it's a little bit more exploring, story-oriented, this narrative that's taking you down the literal deep depths. And we're going in with Soma, which is a game that I know Cameron's been telling me about for years. I've literally had it sitting on my PS4 for a good while. I think they must have gave it out for a PS Plus one at some point. Yep. So I've had it there, and I'm like, well, I've known about this one. I've seen it there. It's been on my list and stuff, but never sat down and played it myself. I know Cameron's played it a few times by now, and it's an interesting one. I'm just going to say this right off the bat. I would have never played this on my own. Like, if Cameron didn't bring this one up, I would have looked at it and been like, it's got a cool visual look, but just like that gameplay style, it's the one survival horror type that I mostly don't care for, where you don't fight back, you kind of have to run and hide, and so on like that. Now, granted, in this game, there's actually less of that than one might think. It's not like some other games where that's like the whole game. Or I always use Alien Isolation as my example, but like ones where like you get hit once and it's an instant KO, dead, restart where your save file was. You know what I mean?
Yep.
This one at least, it gave you a little bit more of a, not really a fighting chance, but it gave you like multiple tries at least before you got totally screwed over.
Yep. And that's like, I would almost just right off the bat just drop survival out of the horror of this game. This is a horror adventure more than anything, like it's horror in tone, but is completely a narrative driven experience. It's literally all about its story. It's about finding the notes and finding, like things throughout the environment that explain what's actually going on in this universe and all that. It very much does have, in terms of like gameplay mechanics, it does just have the run and hide type thing, which as well is not entirely my favorite thing and is definitely the weakest point of this game, in my opinion. But I don't know. I still think that some of those sections where you are running and hiding from the thing, adds a lot of tension and whatnot. It brings some of that, like what's described as like panic horror, to that effect. As Spence mentioned, 2015 game developed by Frictional Games, and like they are one of the masters of this genre type. They came out with Penumbra, they did Amnesia, The Dark Descent, and Machine on Pigs and things like that. So it's all the same developer. This is just their sci-fi version of psychological, existential horror, more or less. So.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense there and so on. And yeah, I know some of those other games too. But yeah, like really, it's like the gameplay reminds me, it sounds strange, but it really reminds me a lot of Myst. That's like my like old man like way of going like, oh, it feels like Myst, where you kind of walk around and you point and click at stuff and, kind of make your progress through it, and then you throw a horror element over it. The weird thing is when I first started this game up though, and the way that it plays, I instantaneously went, wait a second, is this a VR game? Because it feels like it's so much designed control-wise to be VR that I looked it up because I'm like, it's on PlayStation. Maybe it's one of those PlayStation VR ones, or if anything, maybe there's a Quest version or anything like that. And I tried looking it up, and there was nothing there. There's somebody made like a fan demo of like the first like apartment level, but I'm like, oh, that's not what I want. Yeah. But it's so weird because just the control scheme of it feels like it was so designed to be a VR game. And since it's only 2015, it's literally at that time period where it could have been, Oh, yeah. It's right at the same time as Resident Evil 7, and just the movement patterns and so on like that felt like you should be, especially using like the Quest controller and everything like that with all the hand actions and pulling levers, opening doors and all that stuff. It was like, I was so surprised. It felt like it was like, I should be like in a VR situation. For some reason, it's not. It's so close, but I'm so surprised it isn't.
Yep. So my experiences with this game, I've played it 3 times over on PS4. That version that you're talking about, because it did come out on PS Plus at some point after launch. And yes, I very much agree. It plays fine on a controller. Like you can totally move around and grab objects and things like that, but it definitely feels clunky. This time, though, getting to play on Steam with a mouse, because you have the mouse in your hand and you're physically. So a lot of what this game has is like very heavy in terms of like physics and things like that. objects are scattered everywhere, and you can grab all the things and toss them across the room and break windows. And like, dude, it reminds me a lot of like Half-Life 2's, like its big gimmick, was the gravity gun and whatnot, and all of its physics designs and whatnot. So it very much has that. But to have a mouse in your hand and physically be able to grab and move and like kind of shift around and whatnot, it's the same thing when like flipping a switch or opening a door or whatever. It's like you physically like grab the door and then like pull it towards yourself so you can open it, and then move around it and whatnot. So it's very tactile with the mouse, and I think that it's easily my preferred way to play at this point. So
I was gonna say 100%. Like I noticed that right off the bat that it was like, this really should be played with a mouse. It works on with a controller. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's just like when you play any other kind of like PC style games, but you're playing them on a console, like an RTS, or even things. Oh, one second, I'm gonna go back to Myst. It's like when you play Myst on console, it doesn't feel like the same as if you were playing it on a PC, where you got the mouse, where you easily can point and click. You're moving around the joystick and everything like that. And at the same time, you can get by, but there's a lot of things like if you're reading like on like the anytime you find a note or anything like that, and then I want to go back, I have the natural tendency to press circle. Well, you don't press circle in this game. It's like you have to go down like you're using a mouse and click backwards, and so on like that. So there's always like those little things where I'm like, yeah, that's where the mouse would have came in handy and so on like that, And I don't know if you can even use a mouse on the PS4 because there's very few games that are
possibly.
Maybe not. It feels like by PS5 they kind of allowed a little bit more of that going, but it doesn't throw it off, but it is like one of those ones. It's mouse definitely seems the way, but I still think this game is really missing out by not being in VR. Like this is one of those ones like you could skip a lot of other games and go like, this game needs to be barely even remade. It's just you just turn the controls over to a VR. Like that's all you have to do.
Oh yeah. It seems prime specific. Like it seems prime for that style gameplay. And I mean, after playing it a few times now, like I would probably play it in VR. But for a first time experience, well, this game would scare the piss out of me in VR. It's already immersive enough, and I think that's one of its finest qualities is its design in general is just like it's so engrossing being in these facilities and labs and like all these random places that we go to in this game. Is just very, very engrossing, and it's creepy and it's dark and it's just eerie. I love the tones of this game because like it doesn't have to jump scare you nonstop. It's not that type of game. There are jump scares for sure with throughout the game, but it's never like a monster jumping out at you. It's just like you're walking down the dark dingy hallway or whatever, and like a pipe bursts, and all of a sudden steam starts flying out and shit, and then things get like really loud, and whatnot, and that's how it's like scaring you. They'll like progress further, like what's gonna happen next, but with my notes on gameplay, like I basically just broke it down into just very, very simple terms because there isn't much in terms of gameplay in this game. But it's a bona fide walking simulator, first and foremost. That's majority of the game. Is just you're exploring, you're interacting with things, and doing like light puzzles and whatnot. So that's my second point. Light puzzles is a mechanic in this game. Flip the switch and turn on the thing and plug in the thing and take the thing out of the wall and move it over here, and like just random things like that. Again, very, very good physics, and I just think like the world is very tactile in terms of like its interactability, being able to pick things up, being able to move objects and whatnot, and it does play into gameplay a little bit in a handful of sections. So
yeah, definitely most or definitely on that part. I was going to say is what it kind of reminded me of is there's a game, I just happened to play both of them kind of at the same time, but there was an Alien game that came out on Quest and PS VR 2. And ironically, that Alien game plays very similar to this. It's just think that there's alien creatures instead, xenomorphs that you have to fight. Of course, you have guns and everything in that game. Yep. But like, it was weird how similar the control scheme felt. It was like, well, here it is right here in the VR thing. I'm opening drawers, turning valves, and all kinds of stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, it's all just very engrossing, and it feels grounded. It feels good. Like there's not much about your movement and your interacting with items and things, or interacting with the environment and things that like just feels bad. there's one exception that when we get to the point, I'll explain it. But there's like one section where we have to do some light traversal mechanics of like you have to jump across, you know, things and whatnot. I'd say for the most part it works pretty all right, but like all it takes is you to just like mistime that jump, you know, and then you fall down, and then it's just like it takes forever to get back up to this section and whatnot. It's a little bit later in the sewer section is what I'm talking, but anyways, beyond that, like the game is very solid. It's very straightforward. It's pretty linear for the most part. Like it's hard to get. Like there's certain sections where I suppose you could get turned around and whatnot, and I definitely did on my first run. You know, the first run of this game for me took me about 15 hours, whereas this fourth run of the game for me is about 8. You know, somewhere around there. Easily could have done it a lot faster than that, but I was trying to maintain pace with you. Meanwhile, like take notes and, you know, like actually like study the environment and learn a bit more about it. You know, try to find all the pieces that I've been missing up to this point. So
yeah, no, that totally makes sense, because literally I'll say this game was one of those ones where I even told you this early on. I'm like, I feel like I'm just aimlessly walking, and then all of a sudden I found where I need to go. Like that's how that happened to me so many times, where it's like I don't know where I'm going. Oh, hey, what do you know? Here it is. Yep. You know, just it looked like I was going to get so lost, but somehow, some way, I sort of got guided in the right direction. Yep. You know, it just seemed like you follow either the lights when you're underwater, or you just happen to find the door that's there. And so I will say they do a pretty good job, because this could be one of those games where you could get so stuck where you're like, where do I go? And I hate to start bring up Myst again, but like Myst is a perfect example of that, where sometimes you get to certain points, you're like, where the hell am I supposed to go? There's literally no information on what I'm doing right now. You know, exactly. This one's pretty, ironically, you bump around, you know, just traversing, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, there's the right switch. There we go. Okay. Oh, and then you're on to the next part. And it's not like you have to do any backtracking or anything like that, that could be something that would make it very complicated. But what I like is it's an adventure one, so you're continuously progressing your way through these, you know, underwater laboratories and so on.
Yeah, and that's really, I mean, all there really is to say. I mean, outside of the individual like section to section, there's really not much more to say in terms of its design and its gameplay per se. Like I said, until we get to each individual section, because I think there are some interesting mechanics at play here that, and along with its design, I think there's a lot of really cool designs in this game that, again, are just like insanely engrossing. You know, just really sucked me into the experience. And this time this is the first time I played with just headphones on, and good Lord, there's noises in this game that I have never heard before, and it's like, what is that? You know. Yet again, adding to that tension, you know. So
yeah, there definitely is a lot of cool sound effects that just kind of rip through these areas and whatnot. But yeah, I guess we could jump in kind of past that. We're just gonna say real quick that it's spoilers ahead if you'd never played this, because this game is very heavy story. So of course, the only way you can talk about it is to talk about it like we've all sat down and played it. Now, granted, I will say you could probably hear everything about this game, yet still experiencing it will be its own thing, you know. It's one of those ones I feel like you can definitely spoil this game, but you can't spoil the full experience.
No, not at all. And I'd say before we go section to section, there's 4 core themes in this game that I noted, and those would be, one would be like, what does it mean to be human? Is a very core theme of this game. Can a digital consciousness be you, quote unquote? Is existence worth continuing if it's only in a simulation? And identity, memory, and the soul in a post-human world. Like, what do those things mean? And so if you're into that type of existentialism type horror, 100% play this game. There's 2 modes that you can play as well. There's 2 difficulty modes. One being its normal mode, where everything is just normal in the game. Monsters attack you. You can get, you know, damaged and whatnot. But there's also a secondary mode that I'm glad that, because I assume you played on normal, right?
Yeah, I just did the normal one, because you said play the normal. I was for a second I'm like, are you sure about this? I'm like, but then I said, when I see that story mode thing, I go, well, I don't want to bitch out. That's how whenever I see that, it's like, if it said easy, I'd be like, I'll just put it on easy. Why not? But when it says story mode, I get kind of, iffy because like I'll use example. We did Crow Country, and I remember when I just wanted to see what their story mode thing was like, and I was like, it almost ruined the experience. Like I felt like you were not even really getting you were getting like 1/4 the game. It was like worse than getting like a TBS cut version of a movie, of a rated R movie. You know, you were really missing out on stuff. Where I think in this one, because I'm just going to kind of compare it, because I think is just what it says there is that like you can kind of go through it and everything's still there. It's just you don't die, I guess.
Yeah.
So realistically, you could play the story mode, and I don't think that it's not like you're going to lose out on much. No. You know what I mean? I think it'll still be scary. You'll still get to see the monsters. One of the videos that you sent me, the guy was talking about, he was like, the kind of cool thing is when you play this mode, is it allows you to walk around a lot more and explore stuff instead of having to worry about, here's a stupid monster again. You know, because that sometimes is like the problem I will say in some of these games that they're the hide and seek ones, is I find them less scary and more just obnoxious. Like,
annoying.
Here's this guy you can't kill again. It's like, it's just like an asshole shows up and just wants to ruin your day. And you're like, dude, I'm trying to solve a puzzle here or something like that. And like, of course you had to show up here, and you know, even if it's one of those games where you can shoot the guy, but like he won't go down.
Oh yeah.
You know, it almost like, to me it feels less scary and more just a pain in the ass. Ironically, this one's not so bad because one, if you do get hit by the enemies, you literally get 1 or 2 like chances to go again. And then if you do totally die, which I did, I've died a couple times, you literally just restart like right before that scene. So it's not like you lost any progress or anything like that, you know. And most of them are kind of scenes. They're mostly literally, there the thing walks across the room, you run across, you know, boom, you're away from it. Or you go in, you grab the item, you come back out. You know, they're
very few and far between. They're very few and far between. I think they're well paced throughout the story. But I do agree. Every time it happened, especially on this run, knowing when they were coming and all that, like I just got annoyed because it's like, cool, now I got to stare at the wall for fucking 30 seconds waiting for this thing to pass by until I can move on to the next section, you know? Which is to my point about the difficulty modes. I think there's something to be said about if you play on normal, you do experience that panic horror is what I was talking about. You know, you have a thing after you at some, you know, sporadically throughout the storyline. And I think that there's enough there to be like, it's tense. You need to hide. You're trying to like, you know, peek around corners and whatnot, trying to stay away from this thing. You can totally gamify it. You can break it down to wireframe and just like, oh, the thing can't see, so I'm not going to make any noise, you know, because it has super hearing or whatever. Or, oh, it can see, so I'm just going to hide in this dark corner until it passes by or whatever. You can 100% like, you know, gamify it and break it down to wireframe that way. But now kind of like reconceptualizing like what story mode actually is, I don't think you're missing anything. You're just taking the horror out at that point, you know, like there's still atmospheric horror. There's still very much like tonal horror throughout the game. But in terms of like immediate threat, I don't think that it if you play it on easy mode or whatever, on story mode, I don't think you're going to miss much. I think you'll be able to still fully experience the game as is. You just miss some of the panic horror side of things, which a lot of people don't like, you know, which is me, you know, like for the most part. I genuinely don't like that style of gameplay. I think it works here, but in general, it's not my favorite thing. So
yeah, I think that the easy mode would just tone it down as all, like, because you could still be shocked by like, oh geez, look, there's that thing right there or something like that. It's just I guess it just takes out the fear of death, I guess, is the only thing, you know, because a lot of times this is the example I use of like what I consider a good version of, I guess you would almost say, panic horror or any of this stuff. It's in Resident Evil 3, it's Nemesis, the perfect example, because he shows up, you know, somewhat randomly. You know, once you play the game a few times, you know the spots he does. But the thing I like about that game is, yeah, you can either run away from him, but you could also kill him every single time he shows up. So it gives you that option. It's never just like, oh, you know, he grabbed you, you know, cutscene, you're dead, you know, not like certain other games like Metroid Dread or even like Alien Isolation and so on like that. I always felt like that's what I thought that was the most balanced approach. Like, you're better off probably running away from Nemesis. You know, you're just going to end up wasting ammo unless you want to pick up the special gun parts, you know. But at the same time, if you felt like shooting him, it's like, that's your choice. You know what I mean? The game's not going to punish you for it. Or Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, the original Resident Evil 2, not the new one. The new one cheats that one a bit because they make him have unlimited health. But
exactly.
In the original one, you could, every single time Mr. X appeared, you could either run away from him or you could shoot him. It gave you the option. you know. And I always think that's kind of the better way to go, is just give me the choice. Maybe it's that thing where it's better not the fight, you know, but at least I have a choice, you know. It's the same thing like in stealth games too. I always kind of hate when there's stealth games where it's like a guy sees you, it just, you know, cuts to like restart, and you're like, oh, that's stupid, you know. At least let me fight it out. I would rather have 100 guys come swarm me, and it's pretty much like I'm not gonna win, but at least you're giving me a chance.
Yeah, exactly. No, I had one more comment. That's just a recurring theme on this podcast. So this game does two things very well. One, it doesn't instant kill you, except with the exception of one section. But it doesn't instant kill you, like Spence said. So if you do get attacked by a monster or whatever, it basically just knocks your ass out and then it disappears and it goes somewhere else in the level or whatever, and you wake back up and then you have a second try. Perfect. Okay, that teaches me as the player, okay, don't do that thing again, you know, like, which is great, you know, and then you know that for the next time. And the second thing is that this game just does not have a map. And I think that it plays well into your comment earlier about like just how streamlined everything is. And yeah, you can get lost, you know, in terms of like you just being disoriented and where you are, which I also think is a huge theme of this game, is just disorientation in general. But more often than not, you always end up in the spot you're supposed to go and you don't need a map at all, you know? So I think that that's very good. You know, those are two core fundamental things of this genre that a lot of developers get wrong, and I think that Frictional did it right in this game. So
yeah, no, I did write that down in my notes, that there is no map. And sometimes there's certain points where I wouldn't mind of being able to rip that stupid map off the wall when you see it there. It's like sometimes in a video game, it's like, it's right there, damn it! Like, can I take this with me? You know, but you know, for the most part, I still was able to get by. Like I bumbled my way through, and I still figured it out. You know, that was how a lot of my experience was, where it's just up. Oh, hey, there happens to be the right room finally. You know.
Yep. So again, before we get into this, I think at this point, if you like sci-fi, if you like existential horror, you like, you know, the hide and seek mechanics of some of these games and whatnot, or maybe not, if you want to play story mode, play this game like 100%. I think it's totally worth your time.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's good. Once again, I'm just gonna say this real quick. I think it's good that it has that story mode. So if you're kind of like myself, who generally doesn't like games that have that hide and seek mechanics, well, guess what? You can take that right off. It's like. But it's not like other games where I don't think you lose out. I think you're still getting like 99% of the experience.
Yes. Yep. So, Soma. So the very start of this game, we are in what appears to be a dream sequence, and it is. We note, you know, like there's loud crash that happens. There's sirens that are going off. And Simon, we wake up as this character named Simon Jarrett in his apartment, kind of wakes up kind of frantically out of bed or whatever, out of this nightmare, and sits up on his bed, and he receives a phone call. We look down at the phone and it says Dr. Munchie on it. And we answer that phone and you talk to this doctor or whatever. And he's like, oh, did you take your tracer fluid for the scan today? And he's like, no, I haven't done that yet, but, you know, I know my appointment's in an hour or whatever. So you get off the phone with the doctor. Now, all of a sudden, you know, the game points you in the direction of like, okay, you have this doctor's appointment. You need to go find the thing, you know, go find your tracer fluid or whatever. And then it just leashes you into the apartment.
Yeah, you got to tear that apartment apart just to find that stupid tracer fluid.
Yep.
Felt like I had to open every drawer before I finally found it.
Yeah. What's neat about this section, though, is that we learn so much about Simon Jarrett and who he is and, you know, his personality type, what he likes, you know, where he works, you know, all these things. So we find out that he's a coffee shop or a bookstore employee. Very much is into like live music and things, you know, with all of his like posters all over the walls and all this, that, and the other. You see there's a laptop sitting on the desk, and you go up to it and you start messing around with all the emails and buttons and whatnot, and you're like, there's a conversation between him and one of his friends about the accident. So you understand like that there was a problem and that you have a brain injury, but like it doesn't really explain too much. Like something happened to Simon at one point or whatever. But what's neat about this section is that it's literally teaching you all the game mechanics in the game. It's like, here's how to move, here's how to open a drawer, here's how to pick up the thing and, you know, pick it up and rotate it around and look at it and things like that, you know. So again, it's like it's introducing you into the game world very smoothly, you know, is what I'd say. And then eventually we find this tracer fluid. we drink it, and then we exit out the door, essentially. And then like a black screen fades, and then and then it fades back in or whatever. And now Simon's at this brain like this lab basically or whatever. You're gonna go see Dr. Munchie.
Well, I was gonna say first he's on the subway and he does get a phone call,
yeah.
which was kind of an interesting phone call because it's like I want to say it's his buddy that was on the email if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And he's pretty much talking to him like how a friend would be like, yo, dude, you might be dead like in the next week or something like that. And he's like, well, dude, calm down, man. Like, it's like, it's going to work out or something like that. We're just going to get a scan, but like, it's almost, he's saying it kind of like in a concerned but funny way and whatnot. And, so you do kind of have this interesting conversation. So it kind of adds a little bit more to there. And then you eventually get to, you get to the doctor's office, and this should be like the key thing. If you get to the doctor's office and there's literally like nobody in there, and you're able just to go and just randomly shuffle through all the stuff there and have to look for a code to get through the door, like this is like setting up so many like red flags like maybe you need a different doctor.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what happens. You show up to this place that's devoid of all humans. You're like, what is going on? There's one door that you can enter into, and it's got a code lock on it. So yeah, you go over to the desk or whatever, the receptionist desk, and you start, fumbling through the drawers and whatnot, and get your 4-digit code. And then you open that door, and next thing you know is like you hear Dr. Munchie like out, kind of off like down the hallway a bit or whatever. So you're walking down this hallway, walk into this room, and it's basically like this just like large like server room essentially. There's a terminal on the wall that he's standing next to. There's like all these like server looking things on the wall next to it, and then there's just like this chair in the middle of the thing. And you start to talk to Munchie, and he starts to describe like what's about to happen to you, and he's it's very, very deep, like where he comes from and how he becomes who he is, that we can get into a little bit later. But Munchie essentially he's an experimental scientist. He is using brain scan technology to 3D scan your brain, kind of like an MRI or something like that, and basically upload that digital version of you into his machines or whatever, and can attack it with stimuli like over and over and over again from all these different angles and different procedures and whatnot, trying to come up with a cure digitally before they actually perform an experiment on you. So he's explaining all that to you, and Simon's kind of like, I don't know, more or less just like okay with it. He's just like, yeah, like let's see how this goes, like better than nothing, essentially, like because essentially at this point he's given about a month to live is what we find out. Yeah. And so you sit down in this chair, and the doctor's talking to you and whatnot, and then all of a sudden this visor thing kind of comes down, and it sucks up to your face, and there's a screen in there and whatnot. And Dr. Munchie basically just says like, all right, it's, like, are you ready? Essentially. And you say, yeah. And then next thing you know is like the thing flashes, and then everything just kind of fades to black or whatever. I think at this point, first time that I played this or whatever, like I really didn't know what to think, because Munchie's talking about like a digital consciousness of yourself, and that he was going to send it through all these like virtual things and whatnot. So essentially what happens is like after that flash happens, it fades to black, fades back in. Now all of a sudden you wake up in this just like extremely odd place, that's just like a dark, decrepit lab. You're in the same room that you were in before, but it's like just sci-fi it out, and there's like things are broken, lights aren't on, things like that. It's like very dark and disheveled and just dirty and stuff like that. And me as my very first time playing this game, I was just like, oh, I'm in one of the simulations that he's trying to use for the brain scan, or whatever. So you basically you stand up. Simon has no idea where he is, anything that's going on. There's nobody around, and he starts just calling out, just Dr. Munchie, Dr. Munchie. You're like, what's going on? Where am I? This, that, and the other. The room that you're in is locked, so you can't get out. And you're like, looking around. And again, this is where the game's like very tactile with its like picking up of objects and like how weighty everything is and whatnot. And you kind of like notice that like the window to that office is cracked, like there's cracks to the window. So you as a player, intuitive, you pick up the heavy thing and you throw the heavy thing through the glass, and it breaks the glass, and shit, now you can get out. and then it's basically like at this point, like we just start exploring this lab area, like the site that we're in. And again, it's very mechanical. It's very everything's made out of metal and like very sharp angled corners and things like that, long hallways, and just very, very dark. And I'm curious, like what you as a new player were experiencing during this point.
Well, the interesting thing too is I literally had no idea what kind of game I was getting into. I knew absolutely nothing of what it was. Like, I just knew Soma. That logo on the front was all I saw, So I was just kind of going, all right, let's see where this goes. You know what I mean? And then when I did kind of get there, it sounds strange. I just kind of was going along with it at that point. I wasn't even thinking too hard since I guess it was my first time. I'm like, okay, where are we at now? Okay, we'll find out, and then like once I started seeing the robots or kind of just the machinery, I'm like, well, obviously this seems like it's futuristic, so I kind of was going like, maybe, yeah, he's, he was been in a coma or something like that, and now he finally has just woken up or whatnot like that, because it looks like we're now in some kind of weird futuristic zone, almost very decrepit and whatnot. And I think this is the part where you finally walk around just aimlessly checking things out and so on like that. You might find a couple notes right here, but I do remember one of the first things you do come across is there's like that one robot dude who, of course, has a human voice, and he's all like mangled, sitting there like on the conveyor belt and whatnot like that. What was his name? Like Johnny or something like that.
That's Carl. Yeah.
Carl. Yeah.
Yeah, and, Carl comes a little bit later than this.
Oh, maybe he does. Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking that was the first robot you ran into. But I guess you are running around, I guess, all just the hallways at the moment, and there's nothing there. And you're trying to piecemeal, like, is this still that same doctor's office? Is it just way in the future? Is it just something different? Like, why? It was already dark and mysterious the initial time I came in here, and it's only gotten worse since then.
Yeah. The primary thing of this particular area is that, and you can see it on the walls and stuff, but we start to recognize that we're at this place called Upsilon, and so we're at Site Upsilon is what it's called or whatever. The primary start of this game gives you a tool called the Omni tool, and you see it right at the get-go, right in Dr. Munchie's office when you wake up and you're nobody's around or whatever, but you see this little tool, but it's missing a Cortex chip or whatever. So like the very first thing we're supposed to do as a player is just like go find a Cortex chip for this. Walking down these long dark hallways and whatnot, again, very, very oozy with atmosphere. Everything is like very loud, like all the noises that do occur are very loud and whatnot, and it puts you on edge because like the game doesn't toss anything at you at this point in terms of monsters or like any kind of enemies or anything, but it's just like atmospherically it's so heavy in there.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying to walk around. So we find the Omni tool, we get the what do we get? We get the microchip thing. We install it onto that, and then this is where we come across our first robot. But this is the guy that's plugged into the terminals, and he's just on the ground and he won't communicate with us. We walk up to it and he's talking, and basically like he's on the ground. There's two tendrils coming out of him, and he's plugged into these terminals essentially. You as the player try to interact with it. He doesn't communicate back, but he's just kind of mumbling to himself or whatever. And then all of a sudden, like you notice that when you hover your mouse over the one of the ends of the tendrils that are plugged into the terminal, like you can actually grab it. And you grab one and then you pull it out of the terminal, and then dude starts to react to it. He's just like, oh, I was so happy. Like, what are you doing? Like why are you doing this to me and stuff? And you're trying to communicate with it and it won't communicate back. And then you pull the second one out, and then the thing dies. And it's just like one of those experiences. It's just like, what the fuck just happened? Like what? And now we can use the terminal, and we hop onto the terminal, and then all of a sudden this woman appears, and her name's Catherine, and she is more or less trying to tell you like, oh, you're on Upsilon, divert the power, and I need you to make it to where do we go next? Lambda. So she's in Site Lambda, and she wants you to go to Lambda essentially. But during this conversation, there's a lot of static going on between the intercoms and all that. So she tells you to get to the Upsilon comm center. So from this point, it's like, okay, we found our chip, we have our Omni tool, we met another human, that's telling us to get to the comm center so we can actually talk to her, and then eventually make it to this site called Lambda. Now we need to make it to the comm center. It's at this point that we divert some power and whatnot. We turn on Epsilon. So Epsilon is in general, it's the power facility for the totality of Pathos 2, of what we'll find out what Pathos 2 is later. So we turn on the power, and then we make our way into the next area, and this is where the first monster shows up. You basically like you show up like past the generator room, and you go into this area, and then all of a sudden your vision starts to like just glitch and twitch and like, you know, start shaking real heavy and whatnot. Obviously something's wrong, and you have like no idea what that actually is. I think that it's at this point in my first play experience that where I was just terrified and I had no idea what was happening. So I started running around, making a ton of noise, and the monster that you actually come across saw me, chases me down and hits me and whatnot. It scared the shit out of me. It's such a good introduction to an enemy in this part of the game, you know. And what we're seeing is like it's like this large like blob monster looking thing where it's like a mixture of like flesh and machinery kind of melded together with like crazy like lights like on its face and all that, and like large like pincer tool, you know, style hands and whatnot.
Yeah, he's got a big old hand and whatnot, and yeah, I of course got killed by this thing right off the bat because I was just like, okay, I'll walk around this side. Oh, it saw me, came over and got me.
Yep.
You know, and it's like, okay, I'll just wait for it to go by the second time, and then you kind of, I think you just run up the stairs almost. I think you have to switch. You flip a switch, then run up the stairs, and then it's like, well, see you later. You know, like so many of them, and you kind of get past it, and like for a while there, it's gone. But it is. And I guess, I'm trying to think of like, so that's the second, I guess, robot we've sort of ran into in a sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
So robot on the ground that we killed, we met another human, Catherine, and now this monster. Like Spencer said, like you run up the stairs, you flip a switch, it opens up this hatch or whatever, and then bam, we're in the comm center, you know. And this is where Carl comes into play. And this interaction, I think, is probably... It's the first interaction that set the tone in my mind of like, oh shit, something is terribly wrong here. Like what is actually on my first play, I should say, like what is actually going on. So in this part, we need to essentially turn on the comms relay. You know, we have to divert some power to do that and whatnot. And you come across this like, I don't know, it's like a factory style setting, like with like conveyor belts and shit like that, and all these robotic arms and whatnot. And you see this robot sitting on the ground, you know, like in the middle of this, like, you know, like very industrial area or whatever. And you walk up to it and it just starts talking to you. And it's just like, hey, buddy, like, you going to help me get off the ground here? Like, I've been pinned down for a while and blah, blah, blah. And Simon's like looking at this robot going like, what? And he's like, you know, the robot's like trying to describe who he is and what he's doing and this, that, and the other. And he's like, oh no, my name's Carl. Like, what do you know, like, please help me. And he's just like, Simon's like, you know, you're a robot. Like, what are you talking about? You know, this, that, and the other. Carl has no idea that he's a robot, you know, and Simon is like really, really trying to like wrap his head around what is going on because this hunk of metal in front of him is conscious, you know. Curious what your thoughts through this whole interaction were.
Well, the interesting thing too is because none of these robots generally, or at least the ones that talk, they all talk just like it's a regular human. There's no like robotic voice. There's no like, it's not like it's talking to you like it's, you know, Microsoft Sam or something like that. It's like they're definitely coming at you just like a regular person that just happens to be a robot. And that's the first thing you see, this guy just kind of laying here and so on. It's like, oh, okay. So, I mean, my first thing is I look like, okay, that they've programmed these robots to be really like human casual, like almost a little too lifelike, you know. Strange enough, I was looking at that. I'm like, well, if you're going to make the robot feel so human, why the hell did you make it look so robotic looking in a sense? Like, you think you would have made it look more Android-like, you know what I mean? Almost like Blade Runner style, you know? But it was like, oh, okay, so, okay, here's, you know, this robot's gone kind of insane. Oh, it's like, I kind of felt like, it's okay, see you later, Carl. I'm out of here. I got things to do. You'll figure it out.
Yeah, more or less. Yep. So we got to divert some power. There's a power panel on the wall near Carl or whatever. And you walk up and you flip this switch and then he just starts flipping the fuck out, screaming at you like, turn it back on. What are you doing? Help me, you know, like, and just freaking out. Meanwhile, like, what you're supposed to do is flip that switch, go back over to the terminal in the other room, and like more or less turn on the comms array, thing or whatever. But the whole time you're walking around trying to figure out what to do next, before you realize you have to go back to that terminal, he's just in the room just screaming. Like, and there's like really nothing you can do about it other than turn the power back on and keep him happy or whatever, which is what I did this time. So I turned the power back on just to keep him quiet, more or less, and then explore a bit more. There's a piece you can totally miss if you don't go down the hallway to go see it. You can walk down the hallway and all of a sudden you come across a body, and the body's like laid up against the wall or whatever, and I think it has like a data pad on him or whatever. Maybe it's one of those like memory things. But there's also a name badge on him, like a key badge type thing or whatever, and you pick it up and it says Carl Semkin on it, and it's like, oh shit, like Carl's actually dead. I don't know what the hell that thing is in the other room, but he's saying he's Carl. So anyway, so we find the code to unlock the terminal. We go back, we flip the power back off. Carl in robot form starts flipping out again, or whatever. We turn on the comms array, and then we go up to the comms room. And then this is where we touch base with Catherine again. So from here, we call Catherine, and she's more or less like, okay, I finally got you. Like, I can hear you clearly now. Like, you need to make it to Site Lambda. So again, we're on Site Upsilon, the power generating facility right now. We need to make it to Lambda. There's a bit of notes and stuff in this room that kind of explains like what's going on in terms of like why we're underwater right now, and to kind of briefly explain too a little bit earlier, there are some sections that we're walking through that are like very clear tunnels made out of glass or whatever, so we recognize that we're deep under the ocean, and then with the notes in the comm center room, we kind of realized like there was a world-ending event. It doesn't really explain what it is, but there was some kind of world-ending event, and that the last bits of humanity exist down here on these stations that we're in. So we kind of learn a little bit about that. Catherine tells us that we need to make it over to Lambda, and then all of a sudden the room that we're in starts to collapse. Like the wall bursts in, it starts to fill up with water. Everything kind of like crashes and comes to a halt and then fades to black again. And then this is where Simon wakes up outside of Upsilon, and now we're on the ocean floor. It's kind of at this point where Simon starts to realize like there's something wrong with him, because he's deep on the ocean floor with no scuba gear, no nothing, and is just existing, and he's like, how can I breathe? How is this, that, and the other, and at this point, like we have, like I said, like the Omni tool, we've talked to Catherine and whatnot, and all we know is that now we're on the ocean floor. We need to make it to Lambda.
Exactly, and so this is the part where you just kind of, you come down here, you start aimlessly walking on the ocean floor. You're like, whatever, like, I don't know, you see his hands and everything like that, so you're kind of like, oh, maybe he's got like a dive suit on or something like that, Mm-hmm. Here we go, and you come across, you get this little helper bot that's stuck under the rocks. Mm-hmm. Like, I guess you could help or not help, but I remember I pulled the rock off. Okay, cool. I got a little robot buddy with me. It's kind of literally like having a BB-8 or something like that follow you around, and then next thing you know, you come across some doors, and it goes over and it yep. cuts them open for you and whatnot. It literally reminded me of like Gears of War, like, Jack, rip this door.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. So you got this helper bot going around. You're just exploring these little like bungalows or whatnot on the bottom of the ocean. You run across, there's another robot that's just talking like a crazy old like hobo in a sense, just saying crazy, I don't know, just literally just talking mm-hmm. to itself mm-hmm. practically. And I was like, whatever, this thing's not trying to kill me, so I had no worries here. Let's keep going. Let's progress this adventure. And yeah, you're just down here exploring. This is one of those parts where I thought like I was going to get really stuck down here, because it's like you can't see that well, and I probably got turned around a little bit, but nothing too bad. But like, you just kind of follow the lights, and then next thing you know, you see this weird like Zeppelin landing pad, which I'm like, that's the weirdest name, Zeppelin underwater. Like, okay, like sure, that's, Now, that kind of made me start to question, like, well, for a second I was like, well, did the world flood? Is this like one of those things where like it was like, it's like, oh no, it's just that's just what they called this here. And of course, you talk to Catherine or whatnot. She's like, well, you're going to need this battery from it and stuff. He's like, well, where am I supposed to get that? He's like, well, there's 2 robots you said you saw. Just go club one of them over the head.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like one of those ones where I was like, well, I'm not going to club the helper drone. That guy helped me out. The other guy was being an asshole and wasn't doing anything about it. So I just went over there, clubbed him. It's like the only time you get to kill something in the game. Well, physically, not just pulling the plug on him. And, you go over, you club the living daylights out of this thing, you pull out the chip from there, and you're like, cool. And you go up, plug it in, and then you bring the Zeppelin thing, and literally a Zeppelin underwater, blimp comes towards you to pick you up and take you to the next place.
Yep. And it's at this section too. Before that all happens, this is also the tramway section. So we go like, so after the robot helper helps us burn down some doors and whatnot, we go down in this tramway system, and this is where we finally meet Amy Azaro, which is Carl's partner, more or less. They are the 2 that were left on Upsilon to more or less maintain the facilities and keep it running while everybody else is leaving for Lambda and other sites and whatnot, of which is wholly centered around a being that we will come across a little bit later that I'll talk about. But this is where we find Amy, and Amy is in probably one of the worst conditions I've seen somebody in a video game in quite a long time. She's laying up against this wall, surrounded by all this black liquid goo type stuff with this artificial, lung thing that's pumping, and whatnot, more or less keeping her alive. She's conscious, she's awake, she understands that she's alive and that she's stuck. And then this is another one of those moral choices for Simon to basically say, do I turn off the thing that she's plugged into so I can get the tramway to work, and kill her, or do I keep her alive and just basically exist down here for forever as well? Obviously, you need to make the choice to, progress the game forward. So you turn the thing off and you kill her and whatnot. And this is also another one of those sections where Simon starts to kind of lose his mind about what being alive really means. Mm-hmm. Is it a thing where, I don't know, because this starts to get into some deep, I'm trying to think of the words to even describe it, but more or less what does it mean to be human? Are you actually alive if you're hooked up to all these machines and things that are keeping you alive? More or less in our world, life support essentially.
Yeah.
So we kill her, we go back to the tram, we turn the tram on and whatnot, and we start to go down towards Lambda. And then this is where your piece starts to come in. After we're traversing the tram and whatnot, the tram ends up running out of power, it crashes. We grab Catherine. So Catherine at this point is now on the Omni tool and whatnot. So we grab Catherine, we kick out the emergency thing, and make our way to the maintenance tunnels and whatnot, and then work our way through maintenance tunnels, end up back on the ocean floor, and now we're walking to Lambda. And Lambda, let's see. So this is where we actually meet Catherine, is in Lambda. Remember, because she's there from the comms relay. She tells us to go there. So after exploring some of Lambda facility, we actually come across her. We hear her actually physically talking in the real world or whatever. We open up a door and we realize that leading up to this point, we think Catherine's a human this whole time. But we open up this door and we walk into this office or whatever, and there she is laying on the ground as a robot, and Simon's like, what the fuck? I thought you were real and blah, blah, blah. She's like, well, I am real.
I am real. What the hell are you?
And then this is where we start to learn quite a bit more about the brain scans in general and what they mean, So you're asking Catherine, you're like, well, you're just a robot. And she's like, well, I am, but, I'm a copy of my previous self and yada, yada. And she starts to explain this theory about about being a copy of your previous self. And then she goes, you should look at yourself in the mirror, basically, And there's a couple sections throughout the game where you can walk up to a mirror and actually see yourself and whatnot. And in this section, you can walk up to it. There's no dialogue. There's nothing that is said other than just the blank stare of your robot face, looking into the mirror and whatnot. So I thought that was all really neat because it's revelations for Simon at this point to basically go oh, my true self is long gone at this point. Like, you know, I'm more or less a copy of a copy, you know, that exists in this robot form now.
Yeah, and Simon has a really hard time believing this. Like, I mean, literally to the very end of the game, he's still like, oh, "It's not real. It's not real." It's like, dude, like, did you not just see the last 10 hours that I saw? Like, yeah. Well, what are you doing, buddy? Like,
exactly.
Look at your hand. It's like it's all there. You're a cyborg.
Yep.
Get used to it.
Yep. Exactly. And this is where Catherine explains to us a very pivotal point of the game called the arc. And she starts to explain what the arc is. And the arc is basically, it's this experimental design where it's more or less like the haven of the world. And all of these brain scans that exist, she's more or less trying to put these digital copies of humans onto the arc so she can fire it off into space and preserve humanity for forever. As well, walking around Site Lambda, we're also starting to learn quite a bit more about what the events are that happened on Earth itself. We come to find that there was an asteroid that came in about 100 years after, or roughly about 90 years after our initial scan as Simon. Humanity's faced with this like large threat of this like huge asteroid coming in or whatever. It's going to destroy Earth. With that, we also start to learn quite a bit more about the Pathos 2 facility and what it is. Pathos 2 in general was created by, it's a multi-country organization of corporations that came together to create this underwater facility, more or less for thermal mining was its initial purpose. Based off its successes of thermal mining and whatnot, and like, you know, basically like harnessing energy of like the Earth's core, more or less, you know, what they did is they decided that they wanted to expand its research capabilities and whatnot. So they started investigating more into like, oh, we can use this as a site to launch satellites, you know, from the ocean floor up through the ocean and whatnot, to more or less like make it a more safe launch to launch probes and deep space probes and, you know, like satellites and things like that. So that's its core function. That's its primary purpose of why it exists. Now that we understand that a comet has come to Earth and basically like landed somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, because we're in the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, the comet came down, basically destroyed all of Earth, and there's the scientists that exist down here, and they're the last people on Earth, you know, and they want to try to preserve humanity. There's multiple scientists and stuff that we come across with notes, one of which is a very pivotal point of this game. His name's Johan Ross, and Johan Ross is like one of the primary scientists that existed on Pathos 2 and was tasked with creating an artificial intelligence that'll help keep the facilities like going, more or less. So he creates this thing called the WAU, which is WAU, which is the Warden unit. Alongside that, there was technologies that were being created down in Lambda site and all that were more or less like this Omnigel style, like liquid, like this like black synthetic material type stuff that's like a liquid. And what they were doing is they created this thing to be able to mesh into mechanics and whatnot. So like anything mechanical, metal, you know, things of whatnot. And basically like it's structure gel in order to keep Pathos 2 going at any given time. So if something breaks, they can pour this liquid onto it. So if there's like an electrical failure on a panel or something, you know, like they can pour this liquid onto it. It organically grows all over the panel and basically reconnects everything for it. The problem is that this character, Johan Ross, introduces this chemical compound to his artificial intelligence, and the artificial intelligence goes rogue, essentially, you know? And the WAU unit is like, it's another one of those moral like thought experiments for me anyways, of like, it's programmed to save life. It's programmed to save humanity. In any way that it sees fit. So a lot of the things that we're coming across, like the robots, you know, that have, like Carl, for example, you know, like we come across that dude. at this point in the game, Simon has no idea like what the correlation between the WoW unit is and like all these things that he's seeing and whatnot. But more or less, like this AI is artificially keeping things alive in its image, you know, like of what it thinks that humans should be and whatnot, you know. So.
Well, I was gonna say the weird thing is that other than Simon, it does a pretty bang up job of creating these robots. Like it feels like it's just slapping together like an erector set with like some super glue, and that's how it's designing its robots.
Yep. So, let's see what happens at this point. So Catherine explains the arc, and we have to go through like this brief little. This is also like a quick little puzzle section or whatever, where we have to find the arc, and it's got a GPS data ping on it or whatever, and we go through like all these screens, and it's at this point that we start to see like all the different sites that exist on Pathos 2, you know, because we're going section to section to section, kind of scanning them, trying to find the arc, and we finally find it. It's on site Tau, T-A-W or T-A-U. And Tau is like very, very far away from us, you know, like in order to get there. This is where Catherine starts to describe like, oh, I know how to get there because Tau exists at the bottom of the abyss is the way that she describes it. So it's essentially at the ocean floor. The floor that we've been on this whole time has been a plateau that is above the bottom of the ocean, essentially, which is why there's still light and things like that up there. So in terms of the player, us as the player, we're now told that like, okay, now we need to find Site Tau. We need to get down there. And there's two things that are going to get us down there. One's an extreme diving suit to be able to handle the pressure down that way. And two, we need to find the thing called the Dunbat, which is the machine that's going to take us down there. Mm-hmm. So from here, we essentially like we're still exploring this old sunken facility. There's another monster in this area or whatever, but we're trying to find the device called the Curie. The Curie is essentially like back then when Pathos 2 was operating, the Curie is essentially the transport device that's taking it from the surface of the ocean back down to these facilities, basically just bringing supplies back and forth and whatnot. So we need to find the Curie to be able to take the Curie over to Theta, and then from Theta get into the Dunbat to take it down to Tau, and then at Tau we can find the Arc, and then we can take the Arc to the Omega gun and fire it off into space. That's like the totality of what's going on right now is that Catherine wants you to fire the Arc off into space to preserve humanity.
Yeah, you literally are going on this Lord of the Rings quest, pretty much, to get this arc and shoot it off, and pretty much it's like you're going to Mordor, and you got to go through the underwater version. And I want to say at this point right here, this is when we're in the, like, there's all the dormitory type section, and you kind of can learn about a bunch of people, if I'm not mistaken.
That's on Theta. That's coming up.
Oh, okay, so that's coming up. You know, guys, some of these things are starting to run together by this point for me. But, okay, well, I'll let you keep going until we get to that point then.
Okay. So from here we find the Curie. There's another monster encounter in this section or whatever. It's actually a really good chase scene.
Is this the noise monster? I can't remember. See,
this is the one that you can't look at.
Oh, okay.
One of those versions of that. So this monster in general, it's very humanoid. It stands on two legs. It has like a normal typical body or whatever, but its head is like this big black blob with like all these like little lights all over it and stuff, and it kind of looks like, I don't know, kind of like a spider to an extent in terms of like it's like the amount of eyes that exist on it and whatever. But its whole gimmick is like, just don't look at the fucking thing. Turn off your flashlight, crouch, don't look at it. You know, is like the whole gimmick of its design. And this scene in particular, I thought was actually really cool because like once you get through this facility of avoiding this thing the whole way, you come to this like engine room, and again we find all these tendrils that are plugged into all these engines and whatnot, and we have to start pulling them one by one, you know. So like you pull one, the whole facility starts to shake a little bit, and things are kind of like ominous and eerie and just like, oh, it's a little creepy. You grab the second one, grab the third one, then you pull the fourth one, and then bam, that monster shows up like right there, right in front of you, and then it's the chase scene back to the Curie, you know. Like you got to run back to the Curie. This is probably, I'd be really curious to see if in story mode, if this chase scene still exists, or if you can just like casually walk back to the Curie at this point or not, you know, because like this was one of the tense sections that I thought worked really well because you fully explored the whole area or whatever. This is your out from this site, and so you've built a mental map at this point, and it's really the game like forcing you to sprint back to the Curie and like really remember, oh, I turned left here, oh, I had to go down the staircase, oh, I got to turn right here, left here, right here, and like make it all the way back. I thought it was really good in terms of that. Mm-hmm. So we hop into the Curie, and we start to take off. We power up the ship, Catherine's there with us or whatever, and we start to leave. And like, cool, all right, now we're on our way to Theta. However, midway through travel, like most of the travel that happens in this game, oh shit, something happens. We hear something hit the hull of the ship on the outside, and we crash land back into the ocean floor. But this is another really, really cool part, and this is where what you were talking about earlier, where you have the choice of killing either robot and all that. That's where this happens, because now we're at Site Delta. Okay. And Site Delta is the facilities of where all these scientists were creating the payloads to load into the Omega launcher to fire off into space. This is the very industrial side of the whole facilities and whatnot. You see the assembly lines and like the train tracks and all that, all the robotic arms, the payloads, like the random, like the loaders of like the bullets that they put into this thing to fire things off into space and yada yada. There's not a whole lot that really happens here, other than we learn a lot about a ton of individual characters, a ton of individual scientists and whatnot, of what was going on in Delta at the time of the WoW essentially starting to really freak out. When you enter into Delta, you notice a lot more of that Omnigel stuff everywhere. And this is essentially like, it's not ground zero, but it's near ground zero of like where the WoW properly exists. And we get introduced to a character named Akers here. We never actually meet Akers, but we find remnants of him and whatnot. Akers is essentially like I don't really know how to describe him. He's kind of like the leader of Delta, essentially. He's like the security officer of Delta and whatnot, and he wants to basically stay in Delta, whereas everybody else is getting evacuated because the WoW and the Omnigel have taken over so much of the facilities that it's just not safe to be there anymore. But he wants to stay around to experiment more with it. Mm-hmm. And what we come to find out is that he actually at some point ingests some of this Omni fluid, probably due to hunger or something, along those lines. Yeah, and the Omnigel starts to mutate him and starts to make him go mad and crazy. There's logs in this section that like really got under my skin this time, because I actually spent the time to actually read a lot of this stuff and all that. And you watch his descent into madness happen throughout the whole course of this whole section of going like building to building and like opening up new notes and things like that. To the point of he finally accepts that he wants to go to Theta where everybody else went, but with malicious intent, because the WoW is now entering into his mind and controlling his mind, to the point of like the WoW basically tells him like, oh, you need to remove your eyes. So he like physically like removes his eyes, and you find that like on the ground in one of these research sections, and it's like, oh my god, what is going on,
Well, is this the first guy who gets the WoW kind of like organically combined with like human flesh?
Basically, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was thinking, because like because at first it's robots, but then it becomes in a sense weird cyborg mutations, and this guy being here and so on, and as you learn, I can't remember, is Theta the part where you start finding the people with their heads missing too, just randomly laying there? Okay,
yeah,
see, I keep feeling like
Omicron.
This is like double only playing it once. Is like some of these things are like, what location was that at again?
Yep.
Yeah,
but this is the Zeppelin portion, like you were talking about. So,
okay, yeah. So you get there. Well, that's right, because then you get to that one area that kind of feels like you're in Theta's the one. It feels like you're kind of in a hospital in a sense, not necessarily, but it feels like that. There's a security room, there's an operation room, yada yada yada.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, Theta. So from Delta again, like we have to turn on these comms relays, and like there's a handful of puzzles that you do and all that, and all of a sudden you call in the Zeppelin. The Zeppelin comes, picks you up, and now we're properly on our way to Theta. Theta is essentially the lab. It's the section of Pathos 2 where majority of the people live. So like this is their barracks. This is some pretty deep like research facilities. This is where Catherine existed for majority of the time on her time in Pathos 2, doing her research and all that. There's comm centers, there's a dispatch center, there's an infirmary, there's like all these different things, but more or less this is where people lived at,
because this is where the dormitories are and all that kind of stuff. Correct. Yeah.
Yep.
And Catherine's lab, of course, exists here and whatnot.
Yep. So again, our whole intent of coming to Theta is to find the Dunbat so we can make it down to Site Tau. And this is so when we enter into Theta, we start to explore this facility and whatnot. And I can't remember. I don't think there's any monster encounter, at least initially, at the start of this.
I think there is once you get farther, if I'm not mistaken. I thought there was something that kind of came into that dormitory area towards the very, very end. Once you've already kind of explored almost everything.
Yeah. I remember that there is an encounter here. I just don't remember exactly where it falls in.
And for some reason, I remember it just being one of those ones that kind of just follows you around, but doesn't really get in your way. I mean, if you ran into it, of course, it's going to hurt you. But
But the interesting, like the main takeaway of this area is those dorms. Where you're going, like you're into the barracks, and you're going like room to room, and you're starting to like really learn about hyper individual characters, within this universe. And you start to recognize that this is Catherine Chun's office. This is her research like lab space or whatever, and you really start to dive into her notes and like what she's doing. What we learn about Catherine is that so during the event of the asteroid coming to Earth, she's a scientist up on the surface or whatever, and her whole goal is she's part of like a more or less like, think of it kind of like Armageddon, like the scientists in the movie Armageddon on like, how do we deflect this thing? How do we get it away from Earth and blah, blah, blah. That's her whole point, and she gets brought down.
Let's get a bunch of drillers and train them to be astronauts.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, wouldn't it be easier just to get astronauts and train them to be drillers?
Yeah, exactly.
Shut up, Ben.
We can get what's his face riding the nuke, but yeah, so anyway, so we learn that that's kind of her background. So she comes from that. She ends up on Pathos 2 as the asteroid starts to come closer to Earth or whatever, more or less to preserve herself. She's a little self-centered that way, but still has the intent to try to save humanity. That's her whole goal. She learns about Dr. Munchie's work with brain scans and like storing digital copies of actual humans and whatnot. And throughout all this, we find her lab section where she stores all the data, her terminals and all that, the scan chairs that she uses, to like capture people and all that. So what's going on in the background in the past at this point while she's on this station is that, again, the WoW's kind of going crazy at this point. And that Ross guy kind of pops up here and there throughout our play experience leading up to this about like that the WoW basically needs to be eliminated more or less. And with all that, as it's going crazy, all the scientists across all the different labs that we've been to between, Upsilon, Delta, now this place and all that, everybody's coming to Theta to be safe, essentially. And as that's happening, she's asking for volunteers because she creates the ARC project, where she's essentially telling people like, oh, we can copy you, we can stick you onto this thing, and we can preserve humanity that way, by firing that off into space for, forever until somebody finds it, So that's more or less like how we figure out how she's capturing all of her brain scans, is because majority of the people throughout the totality of Pathos 2 ends up in Theta, to get away from the WoW and be safe, essentially. So and then with that, we start to learn about there's I forgot his name. I think it's Sarang. It's like John Sarang or something like that. It's one of the characters down there. comes up with this thought theory about because he understands that if you do a brain scan, it's a direct copy of yourself at that exact moment that gets brought into, a virtual world. Essentially, you still exist as a human, at that point. But his whole thought is that if I do the brain scan and I copy myself at that exact moment, and if I die in my real form at that exact moment, there's what called the coin toss theory that you read about in some notes or whatever about it's a 50-50 chance of like, will you actually be transferred into the virtual world? The weird part is that,
that's one of those ones when I first saw it, I'm like, what illogical thinking is this? Is just there to tell people who are too emotional. Like, I mean, like, to me, it felt like it's the simple thing. It's like copy and paste on a computer. It's not cut and paste. It's copy and paste. You're not transferring it. You're literally copying it. Like, and Simon's really bad about understanding this. Like the whole way through, it's just like, dude, seriously. Like, did you not use what kind of computer were you using in that room in your house?
Right.
Like, I don't know how hard this is. I know you're very because it's one of those ones. I'll say this. Catherine is she's the logical character. All her decisions are based on logic, where Simon just is very emotional, almost very uneducated, just running around with his heart exposed,
Yep.
That's what Simon is. And so because of that, he says some pretty goofball things throughout it.
Oh yeah. No, he's a complete idiot when it comes to most of this. He does not comprehend. He doesn't understand. Even at this point, because like he fully understands like he's not in his real body anymore, and like he's seen his hands and he's like, you've seen the image of yourself
the robot
in the mirrors
eyes
and stuff, and whatnot. But he still just does not get it, like he doesn't understand that his physical form is like gone and dead for a long time, So with this whole part, we have to, in order to get to the Dunbat, the machine that's going to take us down to one, to take us to Omicron to go get the dive suit, and two, to take us down to Tau. We recognize that the Dunbat is under quarantine under like some kind of security protocol or whatever, and we have to find that code. And in our exploration of the barracks, we come across a character. Oh my god, I'm gonna forget his name. Brandon Wan or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's literally it. Because you find all these characters are out there. I mean, there's like there's the one lady that killed herself, and of course the blood's still all over the it's like it's all fresh and everything like that too. So that made me like how long ago was this?
Oh. Yeah. I forgot to finish my point about that. Sarang or whatever kills himself, puts into everybody else's head that like, oh, there's this coin toss theory of a 50-50 coin flip of, if you kill yourself directly after your brain scan, like you might end up on the ark yourself, so that is causing a ton of people to commit suicide essentially directly after their scans. Catherine like knows of this because again, I forgot his name too, but the primary like leader, the security officer, like main guy of Theta or whatever, is essentially telling Catherine like, we need to shut your project down because people are killing themselves, and we need to actually preserve humanity, not these digital copies that you're throwing onto a computer chip to fire off into space. Like, please, And
who introduced this stupid coin toss theory?
Right?
Jesus, I thought you guys were scientists.
Right. Exactly.
Talk about drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yep. It's pretty. It's just creepy. Like it's so creepy because, like you said, like when you come across that Robin's room or whatever, Robin being the character that killed herself.
I think with like a straight razor or something like that.
Dude, it's just a cot just full of blood and a fucking straight razor, and it's just like
and you pick a straight razor up and throw it. If I'm not mistaken.
Yep. You can interact with it and everything.
I mean, I did that quite a few times because you could pick objects up where like somebody was strapped to like a machine, halfway breathing. And I'm like throwing stuff at them like an asshole like kid, just because I can.
Yep. That's great. So again, the security protocol to unleash the Dunbat. We got to get it out of quarantine. One of the security people of Theta was Brandon Wan, and we come across his room, and we start to learn quite a bit more about him. I think that out of most pieces in the game, this is probably one of the more interesting parts of Soma, in my opinion, because there's so much that gets brought to realization as the player. Simon doesn't quite get it at this point still, but as the player, I'm realizing what I'm doing at this point. So, so we find this character. We understand that, you know, like he knows the code. And in Catherine's research facility, we need to find the data chip that has his brain scan on it so we can upload him into a terminal, turn him on, and more or less get this code out of him. What ends up happening, though, is that, again, we have this data chip, we shove it into the machine, and we turn it on, and we fire up the program or whatever. He's sitting in the scan chair where, in his mind, you know, he just got his scan done, and now he's just waking up out of the chair, you know, or whatever, back to Catherine's office, and it's just like, you know, more or less telling Catherine just like, oh, was that it? Like, that was super easy and blah, 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 and this, that, and the other. And then like realizes that something's wrong, you know, like he's in his chair, but he's in just like an extremely dark room, you know, and there's nothing else around him or whatever, you know, and he starts to freak out, you know, starts to have like a meltdown. He's just like, what is going on? Where am I? What is happening? And blah, 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 you know, and his heart rate starts to tick up real fast, stresses him out, and it kills the program. As Simon goes about it, he just plugs that thing back in. He turns it right back on. Brandon wakes up with the same dialogue. Oh, that was easy. Like, what, you know? Oh shit, where am I? Where am I? And it happens again. You know,
you're like, secret program. Come on, work. Boot up, damn it.
So, Catherine then tells you like, oh, we need to make him more comfortable. You know, like, search around some more. We need more information about him, you know? So you go back and okay. And then you find out like, oh, he had a girlfriend, and a girlfriend has some, he has like a voicemail from his girlfriend or whatever, where Catherine's able to like analyze that, digify it, turn it into AI, and then basically go like, tells you, the player, Simon, you know, just like, oh, I can use her to get this information out of him. Go back to the terminal, you know, let's try it. So you go back, you plug him back in, you turn him on and whatnot, and all of a sudden his girlfriend's in the scene now too, and it's Catherine talking, you know, but it has the girl's voice or whatever, and the dude just like immediately recognizes that something's wrong again, and he's just like, you know, starts to freak out and yada yada.
You put him on the beach environment, or you start getting all these other different things. You're like, okay, he doesn't like the beach. Okay, let's see what. Maybe we'll have to put him into like the museum, like dinosaur section or whatever. Yeah, you know.
Yeah. So you go back and forth, and you're trying all these different methods and whatnot, and then eventually he finally, like, you know, wakes up in that chair. He feels comfortable because his girlfriend's around. He explains the code and blah blah blah, and now all of a sudden you're out of there. But the interesting part of this section is that, again, Simon is just running a program over and over again to get the information he needs to open the door that he needs to get to so he can leave, you know, and like, you know, get into the Dumbat and continue on his journey. But me as the player, I'm sitting there and I'm just thinking about, okay, Simon at the very start of the game, we have a brain scan, and then bam, we wake up in a, you know, random ominous place and whatnot, you know. That's exactly what's going on to Brandon every time we turn on that program. And the moment that we don't get the information that we need out of him, we essentially just turn him off, you know, killing him, you know, more or less. Just have him wake up all over again in a new environment, in a new scene, and his girlfriend's there now all of a sudden. This idea, he doesn't recognize what just happened 5 seconds ago before we killed the program or whatever, you know. And it's just this really weird moral thing to like kill somebody and then wake them back up, and then kill somebody and then wake them back up, just trying to fish for information, you know. And again, like within those 4 core themes of the game, you know, like what does it mean to be human? Like that really starts to sink in at this point as a player. I'm curious what your thoughts were.
You know, I'm gonna say this because I didn't even put any of that together, like until I was watching those videos that you sent me or whatnot, where somebody else was kind of breaking it down. They're talking about like, oh, it's like you're bringing him back to life and killing him. I'm like, the way I looked at it was just like I'm just literally reloading his save file like over and over. Like I didn't think anything of it like that. It was just like whatever. He's just starting again. It's like obviously you're technically, are you killing him? It's like it's just you're turning him off and then he comes back on to right where he last left off at. You know. in a sense, and then you just got to manipulate him because he's not being very cooperative anyways to give you these numbers and so on like that. Nobody's grateful for this second life that they get. That's how I look at it. It's like, hey, you're cloned right here, pretty much. You literally get a second chance, and everybody's kind of bitching about it and whatnot. So I saw it as like kind of a different thing, and I was like, when I heard it first, I was like, oh, huh, interesting. I didn't even look at it like that. I mean, I saw that it was kind of similar to probably Simon, waking up, but I looked at it like, well, we're now robot memories in a sense. You know what I mean? And there's a start and a stop to like every single location. Literally no different than a save state in like a PC video game. You know what I mean? It's just like if I'm playing Tomb Raider and I fall off and Laura falls and dies, I just reload it and go again. I don't think of it like, man, I just killed like Laura Croft like 15 times brutally trying to make this jump.
Yep. No, it's wild to me because I mean, it really begs that question of just like what is real, what is reality, and again, like even this deep into the game, me as a player on my first run, because that was essentially my thoughts, is like I'm just killing this Brandon guy over and over again. But this deep into the game, I started questioning as a player, like, am I in a virtual space? Like, is this one of Munchie's, like thinking like what I thought about at the start of the game when I first woke up in that random place, back on Upsilon. So anyway, so like all these types of things are just like rolling through your head as a player, of just like what is actually reality, what is right, what is wrong, and the god honest answer is, I think that a lot of this game centers around is that there is no right answer. That there really isn't. All this game does is it just presents you with ideas and lets you sit in those ideas for, in your own thoughts, and never provides you with a path forward for what it never gives you the answer, because there is no answer. It's based off the player.
Yeah, and it leaves you kind of in that weird like state of like, when you start questioning the things are kind of almost like in like Total Recall when it's like, about halfway in the movie, the recall guy comes into Arnold Schwarzenegger's like, hotel room and says, whoa, we need to get you back. You're asleep right now in the recall like chair. You know what I mean? You're just having a schizophrenic nightmare in a sense, and then you kind of go, well, wait a second, is that real or is this guy lying? And so on like that. Of course, that guy ends up sweating and Arnold shoots him. So that answered that question. But it does like, put those questions in there the same way that this kind of does too. Like, whoa, who is real? And are you technically alive as a machine, or are you living in a simulation inside of a machine in a weird way? Like,
Yep. And this is also another really key point. I hope you found this, but this in Catherine's office, this also describes what happened to Simon between the last scan to essentially your death, more or less. Did you read all that?
I did find those ones. 'Cause I was gonna say I was gonna bring that one up because I'm like, I think that's in this area too, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
So what you
Which
find
I thought
out,
that was cool.
Yeah, exactly. Because what you find out is that Simon's consciousness, or his digital consciousness, essentially, like, is the foundation of these brain scans. What you find out through some recordings is like, there's a recording directly after the brain scan. So like you get your scan done or whatever in Munchie's office, and then the recording starts right there as soon as you come out of that. And you're talking to Munchie, and he's more or less just trying to put positive thoughts in your head, just like, oh, okay, so here's what's going to happen next. We're basically going to start attacking it with stimuli. We're going to try to, come up with a solution for you, and just give me a couple of days. I'll be in touch, essentially. The second piece is Munchie essentially telling Simon, like, we figured it out, like all the laws around this is fine. We're going to try this route. We're going to do this, that, and the other. And Simon getting all excited about it because he's going to live, like they found the solution for him. His brain's going to stop bleeding and yada, yada. And then the third recording on there is just called Last Recording, June 1, 2015. And this is Simon on his deathbed. And you hear the heart monitor, the beep, 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 as he's sitting there. And then Munchie comes in, and Munchie's tone is completely changed at this point. He's just like, fuck, it should have worked. Like, like, I can't believe this didn't work. And, like apologizing profusely to Simon and whatnot. And this is like Simon, like in his human form, basically accepting death, more or less. And he mentions to Munchie at that point, something to the effect of like, well, it's a good thing you got that brain scan now, you can keep messing around with it and yada, yada. And then, Munchie asks him, he's just like, are you being serious about that? Like, are you sure? And Simon more or less like,
you want to sign that over right now?
Yeah, exactly. You know,
you gonna make that legal real quick?
yeah. And then Simon just basically replies with just like, you know, he's like, yeah, it's actually kind of cool. He's like, it feels like a part of me is going to live on and maybe help somebody in the future and yada yada, you know. So we find out that Simon's brain scan is essentially the progenitor for all of these scans that have ever happened, you know, and all that. And then from here, you know, like, so there's a ton of revelations with that, you know, of just like, what does it mean to be human? You know, like, who is Simon? What happened to Simon? You know, like in his first form, anyways. So now we have the password, and now we can go to the dumb bet. So we head down there, get through all the security protocols, unlock the thing. We start to twist some knobs and plug in some cables and yada yada, and then fucking out of nowhere, that dumb bat starts just like becomes conscious and starts freaking out and screaming again, you know.
Why would it not?
And then it breaks out and it falls into the ocean and it's gone, and it's just like, well,
there it goes.
So so this is where Catherine's just like, well, we still need to get to Omicron and get the dive suit. We need the dive suit at the bare minimum, you know, or whatever. So this is where the game transitions out of Theta proper into Theta Labs. Now, Theta, again, is another huge research facility. And what we come across in this particular section is we're starting to understand that the WoW, the Omnigel, the scientists that exist there, they're all experimenting with this Omnigel stuff. And they start experimenting on biomatter and whatnot. So like squids and fish and, you know, like turtles and things like that, you know, and start intermeshing. You
even as a player,
together.
you could experiment in that one scene where you can pour the Omnigel on the rat and whatnot. Yep. It's a dead lab rat. When you pour the gel on it, it starts to come back to life.
Yep, it reanimates and all that. And there's tons of notes and lore surrounding all that too. You know, of like what this actual material like properly is. Let's see. So we explore this facility a bit. There's I'm pretty sure there's another enemy encounter down here. Not a ton really to talk about. It's just more light puzzles and opening doors and trying to get to basically like where the suits are, you know.
Yeah, because that seems like that's the big thing right now is, yeah, you just got a little bit of things you got to kind of hurdle over, but you're getting towards to find the suit. And once you finally get into that suit room and so on like that, that becomes kind of one of these interesting things, because it's like, you know, you go in there and Catherine's like, oh, it's in one of the, look through the doors, there's like 5 of them there, and you finally open, I think it's like door 4, you swing it open and there's a suit there, and you know, you open the back up, and of course it's a body inside, but it has no head. And it's similar to the things that you've been finding along the way, where there's just bodies and there's no heads on any of them, and so on like that. You know, and as I was playing it through here, I was piecing together. I'm like, well, if it must be one of those weird ways. It's like, you know, probably not like a real world practicality way, but just to make it kind of sci-fi horror-y. It's like, you can keep the body alive, you know, with this Omnigel and so on like that, but you can't use like the same brain. You have to put a robot head on it and scan that in there, and that's how it sort of works, you know, and that's the start of it. And then for some reason they start to mutate as time goes on, and they get more Omnigel, and some of them get stuck to the walls, and some of them just become giant monstrosities and so on like that. And so you see this body here as you just open it up. And, you know, of course, the dive suit's like a girl's like dive suit too. So you kind of have first like, great, is it going to fit on Simon? Like, you know, you know, you wonder that too. But in a weird way, it's actually the transfer is different than you would think. It's not like one of those ones like he's going to just put the suit on like Regina and Dino Crisis 2. No. You're going to learn. You're going to transfer into it. Literally, you're gonna copy paste, not cut paste in here.
Yeah, exactly. And it throws us on this like random little side quest thing where we got to find Omnigel, we got to find a battery, and we got to find the head or whatever, like your little, you know, like the head of the robot.
The robo head thing.
And this goes to that lab that you were talking about. So the battery is one thing, you know, the head is another thing. But the interesting part is, I don't know if you read any of the notes down in the lab section where you pick up the new Omnigel or whatever, but this is a special type of Omnigel, specifically created by one of the scientists to kill the WoW. So there's a handful of notes that kind of allude to that. There's a lot of writing on the wall that, you know, like on whiteboards and things like that, you know, that kind of allude to that, but it doesn't really outright tell you that. So we find the Omnigel, we go back to the dive room or whatever, and we install those components. And so I'm gonna describe Simon, and there's gonna be multiple Simons. Okay, so Simon 1 being human Simon from the start of the game. We're now in, let's call it Simon 2. Okay. So Simon 2 now understands that, like, okay, I need to transfer into this body, and the way to do it is I need to go sit at a scan machine seat or whatever. Catherine's going to scan me in, and then I'm going to transfer over to this body. And this is another one of those, like, deep rooted, like, hit me in the gut the first time I experienced this part, because it's the type of horror that, like, you just can't really describe. Like, it's just a guttural, just like, like, type feeling. So you go and you sit down in the scanner, and you do your scan or whatever, bright flash of light, and then bam, all of a sudden you're, like, in the new suit. And you're like, cool, it all worked, like, sweet, and you start to get out and whatnot. But Simon's dumbass does not remember that it's copy paste, not cut and paste. And you hear yourself. You hear Simon 2, because now we're Simon 3. We're in the next suit, right? Yeah. So you hear Simon 2 talking in the other room, and you're, like, basically yelling at Catherine, just like, what the fuck? Like, what? She's like, how many times do I have to describe this to you? Like,
Yeah, because Catherine before this too, because, like, Simon's having, like, reservations about this whole time. He's like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. You gotta go collect things and put this together. I don't transfer it. She's like, I'll do it. I don't care. I just need to get there. You know what I mean? And she just thinks, like, if you're not gonna do it, I'm going in that suit. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, exactly. Yeah. She's like, I got a mission to accomplish. And so literally she kind of bullies Simon into doing it, but then, the second he does, he once again does not realize of all this stuff he's seen along the way, it still hasn't sunk in that, now there's a second Simon there. And then Catherine's like, well, if you want, go over there and unplug him. His battery will drain in a minute if you want, or something like that. He's like, I don't know if I want to do that. Like, well, that's your choice, or continue the mission, one or the other, And when I was doing it, I was like, I'm going to leave the other Simon there. I want him to explore. Maybe there's more cool stuff he can do down here. Like, you know what I mean?
Man. Yeah.
That's what I'm like, I'm not killing him. I'm like, he's got things he can do,
No, dude. Like, because because again, this is my 4th time playing this game. I've done both ways. It really doesn't matter. Your choices, like, really don't mean much of anything in this game, other than you as the player making the choice or whatever. I decided to kill Simon 2 this time. I was just like, you know what, dude, I'm not gonna leave him stuck on this fucking facility. Like, there's no way he's getting out. Yada yada. So I ended up killing him, and it's a weird choice because again, Simon 1 human, Simon 2 is the character we've been this whole time. Now we're Simon 3. Killing a prior version of yourself is just weird, to begin with. I also don't want a reality where there's, like, if I were in that situation, I wouldn't want multiples of me running around, like, having, like, multiple
Clone
cameras,
army.
Like, it's just weird. It's,
You don't want to be like Jango Fett in Star Wars and then realize that the whole entire army is you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we transfer bodies. You either kill your prior self or you don't, and we leave. And now we're going. Let's see what happens next.
Well, now we start to go into, like, the literal deep sea part, because now we got the new body that can handle the pressure and so on like that. So now we're gonna deep dive down. And if I'm not mistaken, we get in the elevator that takes its sweet time to go down, which makes it feel like you are going way, 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 way down, and then you finally reach that bottom there. And there's a couple of parts here where you got to kind of go up and get some power running and so on like that. And then, of course, you got to go down this door. This is one of the other places where, like, I did fall off and die here. But you have to go down on this old rickety, scaffolding that's down at the bottom of the ocean and jump across. And don't go down. If you go down one of these ladders, you can't get back up, I noticed. That was the problem that I had. I had to literally jump off to, like, restart that file. And then you fall in that abyss for a while. And then finally you land and for some reason die, I guess. I was like, why am I dying? I think I would have just fallen slowly and then would have been stuck down here. But
there's one key component just to mention, because it's going to tie into the WoW that's upcoming. So on that descent, so we hop in this elevator or whatever, and we're descending down into the depths. Midway through that descent, the power cuts. You have to get out. You pull the hatch or whatever. You get the thing going again. You sit back down in your seat. You're continuing down. There's a lot of really cool dialogue with Catherine at this point because she's plugged into the Omni tool and it's like right next to you. And again, like you were saying, this whole sequence takes probably a good like actual real time, like 5 minutes, to like get down to the base of the ocean floor or whatever. And this really started to bring into me like the thoughts of just loneliness. Like if Catherine wasn't there and you were just sitting on that thing just alone, like it's just terrifying. It's just getting darker and darker and darker the further and further you go down. But this is where Ross comes back. So there's a real brief scene where the elevator that you're on like starts to shake really violently or whatever. It stops, the door opens, and all of a sudden this creature just like comes through. That's a humanoid creature or whatever. And we've seen glimpses of him before leading up to this point. But Ross comes through and is just like, you made it. Now I can prepare, and then you kind of like, like fade out and then you fade back in or whatever, and he's gone, and then it continues down the rest down to the ocean floor. I just wanted to mention that real quick because Ross is going to be a continual character that leads into us getting to Site Alpha. So
yeah, well, there's one more thing I want to say too, and this just kind of goes through the whole way, but we never really mentioned it from the beginning, is the fact that like you only talk to Catherine because she's in your Omni tool, but it's not like she talks to you throughout the whole game. You only talk to her when you set her into the machine. But I think that's actually kind of a cool gameplay mechanic because it's not like she's always in your ear the whole time. It's like, but when you do finally, oh, hey, there's that voice again that we get to talk to and so on. Because it's really the only person you're talking to the whole way through. Because everybody else has kind of just been, in a sense, a loon. And,
she's a great companion character, in my opinion.
Well, she's my favorite. I mean, out of the all of like the three characters really down here in a sense, other than a couple others. She's really my favorite character in this whole game. I think because I just like her whole point is she's very straightforward. She's still very optimistic about this, even though everything's kind of going to hell in a handbag. She still has a game plan to get things through. It's never like, because I was kind of always wondering, I'm like, is she gonna like be one of those weird characters that like later down the line she's gonna turn or anything like that? No. She still stays straight for the mission and everything like that. She uses logic the whole way through. So things that like will bother Simon that are emotional problems doesn't faze her one bit because it's not part of the mission.
Yep. No, she's fantastic. I really enjoy her character, and it's something that happens a little early on. So from the first time you load her onto the Omni tool and you unplug her, and then you have to traverse quite a ways. It's one of the underwater open ocean floor sections earlier on in the game, and then you finally come to the next Omni tool place that you can plug her back into, and she comes to, and she's just like, oh god, that was weird, and blah blah blah, because she's essentially the same thing's happening to Brandon, like when we were sitting in the terminal earlier turning him on and off and on and off. It's essentially the same thing's happening to her, where in her mind she just blinks. Basically she like turns off and then turns back on real quick. An exorbitant amount of time can pass and she just doesn't recognize that, like it's just based off how long she's actually powered on. So
it's like she literally fell asleep on a car ride and woke up at the destination.
Yeah, essentially. So and she actually explains that in this section too. As we're going down that elevator, she explains how it's just weird to essentially like be in one area talking to us, Simon, and whatnot, getting unplugged and then just popping into a new area, and whatnot. It's your explanation about like the falling asleep and waking up in a new town in a car ride or something. It's very, very reminiscent of that. It's kind of cool. So now we're at the base of the abyss, and we're at the ocean floor, and this is probably one of the cooler areas in the game, just atmospherically for me. It's insanely dark down here, and talk about like some of the ocean floor areas that we've explored leading up to this point is very much like lead you by lights, and it's still the same down here. There's a lot of lights down here that kind of guide you along the way to the next sites that we need to get to. So again, we're on the ocean floor in the dark depths and whatever. We're trying to make it to Site Tau. Earlier when we were in Omicron, and I was mentioning about how we found all the scientists that were messing around with the structure gel and random biolife and all that. We start to see that down here, and I think it's so cool to come across like the anglerfish.
Yeah. Well, you find that note right beforehand because I remember there's a note you find and it's like whales, squids, anglerfish. I was like, man, it's really specific about the angler. The other two were kind of a little bit more generic, and then it's like anglerfish, huh? Interesting. And I was like, okay, keep that in mind. I feel like something's coming up, you know. And it's weird because it's like. Yeah, I was waiting for like, oh, was there gonna be like a giant like humpback whale that's gonna like eat me or something like that? Like, what's that all about? And it's like, oh no, it's just. You know, you go into these areas where like you're so used to follow the light, if I follow the light, I'll end up where it is. And there's one point too where that's an odd light, and you start walking towards it, and then there's this fish swimming, and you're like, oh, go the other direction.
Yep. Well, it's the first time we've come across like something properly organic. I mean, it's still like modified, I guess, by the structure gel and whatever. But like, yeah, to come across a fish, it's the first. I mean, because leading up to this point, it's been nothing but amalgamations of flesh and machine mixed together, and like just insanely angry at us and always wants to kill us. And all of a sudden it's like a fish. It's like, it's so grounded, but it's still so fucking creepy, to see that. So continuing along this path, again, super dark, we come across the anglerfish. And then I think this is where we see a glimpse of it, I believe. The squid, the large squid. I think that's where this happens. At some point we come across another terminal, and we have to like turn on a helper bot, more or less kind of similar to the one that we came across earlier or whatever, because there's no more lights anymore at this point. Like, we're just staring into the abyss. It's just dark out there or whatever, so we interact with this terminal. We have this like automatic robot thing that has the lights on it, and it's basically our guide, to take us through the abyss.
So you're just blindly following this thing.
Yep. And kind of like after a good 30 seconds of following this thing, and like you're really not finding much of anything else, just like out of nowhere, you just hear this huge amount of turbulence, and then this just like large creature just like comes out of the darkness and just grabs that bot and just whoop off into the distance, and you're just left in the darkness with a couple glow lights next to you, just like, well, what the fuck now,
keep walking.
So so eventually we find our way to actual Tau. We find Tau. And in Tau, we need to find the Ark. That's our whole point of the whole journey leading up to this point, is just like, we gotta find that stupid Ark, and now we're finally here. So let me just read through some of my notes.
Well, I know because you get to another kind of somewhat dormitory area again. I don't know if something else leads up beforehand. Actually, there is that room where there's there's the enemy that's like it reminds me of Boo from Super Mario World, where like if you turn your back, he gets closer to you, but if you look at him, he stops.
Yep.
And that was one of those ones where I know it's supposed to be scary, but I just kind of bust up laughing when that was what his gameplay mechanic was. I'm like, it's Boo from Super Mario.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course I shut the door on him once. I'm like, oh, little son of a bitch. And then he opened the door and was just standing there. I'm like, God damn it.
Yep.
I didn't realize he could open the door.
Yeah.
It's like, you get out of here now.
Yeah, exactly. So here, the primary driver of this whole section is that guy Ross again. We learn a ton about Ross here. So Ross, it essentially is just like, he's for the Ark project. He's against the WoW. He's against like, basically like wanting to continue the WoW's existence, essentially. He tries to kill it. There's that other female scientist that I mentioned in the last facility we were in that created that Omni gel that was very specific to kill the WoW or whatever. And Ross eventually, like, I can't remember exactly what happens to him, but he gets hurt at some point and basically like goes into a coma. And then some scientists pick him up, bring him to Tau, and Tau is like kind of like a medical facility place or whatever. And it's that containment cell that we come across in the middle of that one room. There's like 3 pathways that you can go. There's like 3 doors in that room, and there's like this containment cell type thing. And that creature just continually keeps popping up that we find out is Ross. And the whole time he's not really there to like hurt you or anything. He's just there to kind of tell you like, we need to kill the WoW in various ways, is how he tells you. But essentially what happens with him is that like he gets hurt, he goes into a coma. The scientists of the facility kind of pump him up with some of that omnigel type stuff, and the WoW starts to take over his mind, and he is like desperately trying to get people to take the WoW out, you know, essentially, with this new omnigel stuff that he had created with that woman. You mentioned earlier about like entering Omicron and like all the heads being popped off all the bodies and whatnot. Really early on in the game, there's a whole section of these notes called you may have read about it, but it's called the black box. Are you familiar with the black box is in this game?
I mean, I try to read everything I found, but I know for a fact I probably missed something.
Yeah. So the black box is essentially, it's the way, think of it kind of like nanomachines from Metal Gear. It's it's this physical box that sits on the side of your head that plugs into all your vitals and whatnot. It's routed to the WoW, the AI unit, and it's basically like a monitoring system for all employees in Pathos 2, you know, to like monitor their health rates and heart rates and, you know, blood pressures and all that type of stuff and whatever. Part of the reason why we come across all those bodies in Omicron with their heads popped off is because the WoW unit essentially took brain scans of everybody. So every time that they sit down into one of those pilot machines to so basically like they have these like seats, it's the scanner type thing. You go through the scan process, and then you can control some robot, you know, somewhere in the world to perform tasks and whatever. Every time that a scientist would do that, the WoW is actually taking brain scans of them, keeping their digital selves, you know, stored somewhere. And in the WoW's eyes, it wants humanity to exist that way because humans are fragile and they can die and this, that, and the other. So it unleashes an energy burst, essentially kills everybody in Omicron. So all those black boxes that they had on the side of their head overload, fucking explode their heads and whatever. He's saving the digital copies of these things and implementing them into all the robots through the omnigel that exists throughout the totality of the facilities, is reaching out to all these different like robots and whatnot, installing the digital consciousness of those, you know, people into those robots, which is why we come across Robin and we come across Carl and we come across, you know, like all the various, you know, people that we come across that are stuck in robot bodies. It happened to us. It's the reason why Simon exists in this world too, is because his progenitor scan was imported into that body, you know, back on Upsilon, you know, and then he wakes up and then that, you know, spawns the events of the game or whatever. So that's essentially like what the WoW is doing at this point, is killing everybody to save their digital self, you know, more or less, because it.
Yeah, the digital data is better than the physical, like, you know, body. Interesting. That makes more sense there, because, you know, as I said, I was kind of piecing some of that together myself, but it's like, yeah, that does. It's like, yeah, so it kind of took care of the problem, but saved all the data and then replaced it into badly made robots for that matter. But that was always the key thing. It's like, could we make some better like robots here for people to be put into?
Yep. So again, we learned quite a bit about Ross at this point. Ross just, I mean, his whole story arc is like, he just wants you to kill the WoW. He wants you to get rid of the AI of the facilities and all that. There's another monster encounter in here. Let's see, what else do we do? We learn about a lot more about the plans of like what the launching of the Ark into space looks like. We start to realize that there's a bunch of scientists that are starting to like kind of go back on the Ark project and like not wanting to send it off, because they're starting to realize like, oh, there's all this debris in the atmosphere, and like what happens if, you know, if the Ark never makes it, and, you know, like it's better to be here on Pathos 2 with us, you know, and we'll keep it safe down here. So there's all these arguings going on, you know, between all these different scientists and whatnot. Catherine is still very much about like, no, we need to launch this thing. We need to get it out.
It's one of those ones that's like, if it was in real life, they'd probably have multiple arcs.
Yeah.
You would literally, you would launch a couple of them into space. You'd leave a couple of them down here if someone found it, you know, but of course it's like in a video game kind of story or even a movie story. It's that thing's like, there is only one and we have to make the hard decision.
Yeah, exactly. So after like hearing a bunch of those notes and logs and things like that, we're still on the journey to find the Ark. We need to find it. You know, it's somewhere down here. So after a couple more like some puzzles and more exploration, we finally find the Ark. And in this scene is where we come across Sarah Lindwall. And Sarah Lindwall is properly the last human on Earth. And this scene is also a massive gut punch. Like, she's conscious. She knows who she is. She's on it proper life support. But she's not infected by the WoW. She doesn't have any of the Omnigel stuff, nothing like that. Like, her whole goal was that she wanted to preserve the Ark, and she kept it safe on Tau, where nothing could get to it. And she's essentially like just the guardian of it, you know. It takes some real light talking to of her, of like, she asks who you are, what are you doing here, what's your intent, what's this, that, and the other. You explain, you know, that you're there with Catherine, that, you know, you want to take the Ark, you want to fire it into space, and yada yada. She more or less just says, you know, something to the effect of like, well, I'm too tired to even argue with you, you know, because she's on her deathbed, she's dying, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, please, yeah, take the Ark, you know. So she gives it to you, and then you have this choice as a player to sit there with her, because she asks you to kill her, you know, before you leave. She's like, just do me one more favor, please pull the plug, you know.
Yeah, it's literally like you walked into a senior citizen's like home, and you're like, oh, like, and then like you're like, I need that thing right there. They're like, well, okay, honey, but you're gonna sit here and listen to my story. You're like,
Yep.
oh, okay,
Yep.
well, don't mind me. And then as you're holding it, you're like, great, now I'm kind of stuck here for some reason. Now that I have this in my hands, I can't grab anything else. Now she wants me to listen to her last, you know, minute worth of. You're only gonna be alive for 1 minute, right? That's what Catherine told me about if I killed myself earlier. Like, how long is this gonna go on for? I got stuff to do.
Yep, exactly.
But yeah, it is kind of like you are watching literally the last human die right there in front of you, and so on like that.
Well, and again, it's another one of those moral quandaries of like, okay, Simon 3 now, you know, obviously isn't human. You know, he's a brain scan of a human from some point in the past. But you as the player are taking your robotic body and killing the last human on Earth. And is that right? Do you do that or do you not do that? You know, and again, the game doesn't hold your hand at all. It doesn't tell you right or wrong. It's just like, here's a situation, figure it out.
Well, it is one of those ones, like, let's be honest, with that one right there, it's like, she didn't look like she was going to be going long too much longer anyways. You know what I mean? It's not like, you know, it's like, well, she could have, you know, saved humanity and, you know, started up a brand new, like, group of people and brought civilization. No, she was, like, literally dying on this chair. I mean, if you didn't kill her today, she probably was going to die tomorrow. You know what I mean?
Yep. Exactly.
So there isn't, like, I hate to sort of say it, like, it gives you that decision, but it's like, it's not like there's like choices of like, you know, if you were like almost like a robot coming from space and there was one human left and you decided to take it out, you know, because you could.
Yep. Okay, so
yeah, you get
kill her or not, you get the Ark, you send it down to basically like the transport facility, you know, on Tau.
I want to ask you this: did you ever try not killing her?
No.
Yeah, because I kind of wonder whether if she would just like be like, you're like, Lee, like, see ya, and she's like, no,
yeah, stop, please.
like I almost kind of want to know, because I was like, I'll just see what happens when I like kill her. I was like, I gotta tell you a life story. Oh, great, here we go. You know, but like I kind of wonder what he just left like a dick, taking the Ark.
I'm sure
taking some stuff and throwing it at her. Like, what are you gonna do about it, huh?
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing, you know. It's like, do you leave do you leave Simon 2 back on Omicron? Do you leave, or on Theta or whatever? Do you leave you know, Carl in that state of being powered down, you know, like, and freaking out? Do you leave, you know, like, do you tell? We missed one section. There's that woman named Robin Bass or whatever, and I think it happens like around Delta, somewhere around there. But you come across her and she's in robot form. She's on the bottom of the ocean or whatever, and she's just like confused. She's just like, oh, is this the Ark? Is this the blah blah blah? You know, and you walk up to her and you start talking to her. And Simon, in that conversation, like, you don't have choices in terms of dialogue, like which way you want to go with the dialogue. Simon just talks, and you can hear it in Simon's voice because he's about to tell her that, like, no, you didn't make it on the Ark. You're stuck in a robot body on the bottom of the ocean. But then you just like hear it in his voice where he kind of like his mental cracks, you know, and like he's like, you're gonna be okay. We're all fine. Everything's good, and this and the other, you know, just to keep her happy. So again, just all these moral quandaries, you know, of what does it mean to be human, and how do you handle yourself in this type of world.
You brought up the multiple choice question things. It would be kind of interesting if this game did have that, like Fallout or like Mass Effect, just to be, because I will say this is one of those ones, like, this game has the thing where Simon has his own personality, and then you as the player have your own personality. So you kind of have, like, Simon will say some stupid stuff that you probably wouldn't say. Maybe you relate to some of it, and back and forth. Where sometimes, like, if it did give you that choice, if you were like Shepard, and you could be either a dick or you could be the emotional, like, helpful person, and you could go about it one of two ways. Like, it doesn't have to necessarily change the story. It could be the same way that these choices are, where it's like, it doesn't really matter. It's more of a personal thing of how you feel about it. It'd be interesting if you did kind of have, like, a three-way option, like you had
I fully agree.
like almost in a sense an emotional option, a logic option, and maybe a dick option.
I'd be curious to see, like, I don't know, the story would have to change in so many different ways for something like that to work, because this is like very much just like a straight line path type story, in my opinion. I mean, like, you do have choice in a couple areas, but again, like, it kind of just boils down to you as the player, what you think is right and wrong. I would be interested to see something like that, though, like a multiple choice, style, like a Fallout style game, in this type of context. I think it'd be interesting. So we take the Ark down to the loading bays. We grab it with this, like, hook type mechanism, and it's on this monorail beam, and it just, like, starts to take off, and then we follow it through this tunnel. And essentially, like, it's now moving from Tau to Site Phi, which is PHI. And Phi is where the Omega gun exists, so this is we're getting towards the end of the game here. We want to fire the Ark off, save humanity and blah blah blah. On the way through those tunnels, there's a path that we just can't get past. So yet again, we gotta pop back out into the ocean. We go through some maintenance tunnels and things like that. We pop back out into the ocean, and now we need to basically walk to Phi. On the way to Phi, there's also some really interesting environmental things going on here underwater. It very much feels like kind of like massive, like, sandstorm style, like, in terms of its effects and stuff, of all the, like dust particles blowing by and all that, and, like, everything's, like, very, like, shaky and windy and, like, all that, but obviously it's underwater, so it's all based off currents and whatnot. And I thought it was, like, a really cool way to in my mind, being an earth breather on Earth, like, to see, like, a sandstorm underwater. That's how I imagine it looking like, and, like, I thought it was really cool. It was a really cool design. So we're working our way through all this, and let's see what happens next.
Have we got to the part where we get to make the decision on the WoW that I didn't realize was a decision?
That's about to happen. There's one other piece that I want to say. As we're traversing this area too, there's some caves, and again, this is just wireframe environmental type stuff. But in the caves, like, to see, like, the amount of, like, sea spiders and, like, random, like, urchins and shit, and, like, just all the, like, marine life stuff that exists down here was, like, super cool. And it's just more of, like, an observation, really nothing gameplay wise or story implication or anything. It's just you're at the bottom of the ocean, and I thought it was cool.
Well, no, that's really one of the big things, is just the graphics in this game are very, very immersive, and it really takes you to this place, and the whole look, the whole feel of being underwater and so on, like that, and just gives you a good, like, or a cool feeling of just being down here in these depths.
Yep. So from here, this is where we start to find more and more black tendrils. We start to see the structure gel more. We see a lot of eyes and, glowy bits and things. And it's just getting, like, more and more chaotic as we're moving through the darkness, at the base of the ocean. And this is where we finally come across a sign that just says Site Alpha on it. And walking into Site Alpha, this is where Ross really becomes a thing. Ross really starts popping up a whole bunch here. He pops up at the front of Alpha, and it's essentially like, I'm paraphrasing, but more or less, come on in. The WoW's in here. Come kill it, please. Come help me. So you enter into there, and Ross, semi, like, through a lot of, like, projections and stuff, is, like, just explaining more and more to you about the WoW. And then you come into this, like, open chamber room, and it's, like, very, very big and open. And there's, like, this orb looking thing like in the middle, and it's covered all in black. It's very much like, you know, tied into all the tendrils and whatnot. And we come to find out like, oh shit, no, this is it. This is the WoW. This is the AI, you know, of the totality of Pathos 2. We have a choice here to kill it or not. You know, leading up to this point, all the notes, all the lore, all the bits with Ross and everything, like everything in this game is telling you like the WoW needs to die. But you as the player have the choice. If you look a little bit to the right, there's a door over there with a yellow button on it to where you don't have to interact with the WoW whatsoever. You can just walk right through that door. There's really no implication of doing that. The only thing that really happens if you go that path is that you walk up, you touch the door, Ross starts freaking out. No, help me, please, God, kill this thing, please. You know, you have the tools, you have the capability to do it. And then you leave, and then nothing. You don't find out anything more about the WoW. On the flip end, you can walk up to the WoW, and Ross is like encouraging you to basically stick your arm into its mouth, essentially. And you do that.
Yeah, because that's what I did. I didn't even realize there was a choice. I just walked up to him like, well, I've been sticking my hand in these buttholes the whole way through this game, exactly. So let me just put in another one. Why not? And it's like, oh, what the hell? This one bit me on my arm off.
So yeah, exactly. You know, he bites your arm off or whatever, and then it's just like this like body horror scene of like Simon. It reminds me of Resident Evil 7 and fucking Ethan Winters. You know, like holding his hand, like, oh, my arm's missing.
That's okay. Pour some alcohol on it, tape it up. Oh, look, it's back together again.
Exactly.
And people are bummed out that Chris punched the boulder, and you look at Ethan just fucking takes abuse and tapes himself back up and is able to still keep fighting.
So it bites your arm off, and then it dies, you know, essentially, and then it's like it's just like heavily implied that like, okay, you did this, you know, like you finally killed the WoW and whatever. And then when you leave, like you don't hear anything more about the WoW. Like that, this is the end of the WoW right here, regardless of your choice. If you leave without killing it, you never hear about it again. If you kill it, you never hear about it again. But what's really interesting that I found out after the fact, and this came in post research. So when I mentioned earlier when we were in Theta or Omicron, one of the two, and we got the structure gel, the very special structure gel. Because we use that structure gel in the suit that we use to get down here to Tau, or at least down to the ocean floor, we used it in that suit on the dead body that was in it. So now that structure gel exists within that body. So us shoving our arm into that thing's mouth and it biting us off ingests that structure gel and kills it, essentially. So that's that whole path. That's how that
makes so much more sense, because I didn't piece all that together from that time. It's like, okay, so you were the catalyst to pretty much kill that thing just by wearing the suit.
Yep. So WoW's dead now. That whole story arc kind of wraps itself up, but we still need to make it over to Site Phi, and so we exit out of Alpha and are working our way along the ocean floor towards Phi. And it's at this point the good old Squid Boy comes back, starts chasing us, and yet again, it's the second chase scene in the game that I think works pretty well. Because at this point, like, there's really no other notes to go see in this section because it's just barren, open ocean floor and whatnot. You just got lights, you know, to follow and whatever, and just get there as quickly as possible. It's what the game's trying to project you or trying to push you along to do, is just get to Phi. So I think that these mechanics work pretty well here. The design of that monster is creepy enough to be able to push you forward. I did get hit by it once. Similar principles to any other enemy in this game. You get hit once, you get knocked down, you go unconscious, you wake back up, you got a second chance. So again, nothing really to talk about. It's just another monster, you know, that pushes you along. But now we make it to Site Phi, and this is pretty much the end of the game. There's no more no more enemy encounters down here. This is all about the arc finally making it to Phi. The main piece that I got out of this is what physically happened to real life human Catherine down here. When we come across the loading bay where more or less like where the armature is, to where we need to load the arc into this like essentially like massive bullet, you know, to put into the gun, the Omega relay gun. We find a body on the ground, and no shit, it's Catherine. And through some notes around that area, and this is the other piece too. So I mentioned that black box thing.
Mm-hmm.
So Simon has a black box. It's implied that through the structure gel, through the WoW's influence and all that, the reason why we can go up to a body and just touch it and just get a memory out of it is that we're telepathically like accessing their black box essentially to figure out what happened. So all throughout, it's something that we missed two things on the way here before we get to the very, very end of the game. One being is that so Simon has this like weird ability to where you can go up to a dead body or like, you know, a terminal or whatever, you know, and touch it, and a memory plays, and it really doesn't describe it to you other than a handful of random notes that I found talking about this black box like telepathic type thing. So that's how he's able to like get these core memories out of these people and devices and whatnot. The other thing that we failed to mention, you mentioned it just now in the WoW section, is that when Spence says like we've been touching buttholes this whole time, it's the healing
the healing mechanic of the game. Is, you know, so that's why when I saw it at the very end, I just walked up like, okay, it's just another one of those. Oh, whoa, wow.
Yep. It just straight up takes your arm.
Yeah. You know, and then you guys see Simon fucking climb up with one arm this time, and he's like, oh, now it's gonna make the. Like, I hope there's not a bunch of ladders now from this point on.
No.
There's only like two of them.
And that's one of the differences. So if you don't get your arm bitten off, that's one of the only differences outside of the dialogue that Ross says as you're leaving, is that you have your arm when you're climbing up and down those ladders at the end or whatever. It's like pretty much the only core difference.
And let's be honest, that's another one like killing the WoW. Like, what does that really make a difference, boy, at this point? If literally the last human alive is gone, like that WoW, let that thing just do whatever it wants. Who cares?
Exactly.
It's just doing its thing on the, you know, the bottom of the sea.
Now you're getting it, you know, because again, that's how the writer of this wrote this story, is because a lot of this doesn't matter. Like a lot of it doesn't, you know, but we'll get to that here in a sec. So we find Catherine's body, and we find out through some of those core memory unlock things or whatever that, yeah, one of the other scientists down there did not agree with the ARC project and fucking killed her.
Yep.
Hit her over the head with a wrench, straight up killed her. And that's where Sarah Lindwall was part of that group that was about to. They literally sent it from Theta over to Phi to fire it off, and at Phi is where Catherine gets killed. Everybody starts to, you know, question the ARC project in general, and is more or less telling each other like, no, we need to keep it down here to keep it safe. And that's where Sarah Lindwall takes it back to Theta. And hides in there, you know, by herself. She's the woman with the, you know, the thing from earlier. We have that choice too.
Yeah, where she's locked herself in the room and everything.
Right. And yeah, so that's essentially how Catherine dies. Is that just another scientist just did not agree with her and decided to kill her, decided to take her out. So after some more, you know, like real light puzzles and some further exploration and whatnot, we finally get the ARC again. We bring the ARC to the armature device, slap it in there, and then we send it over to the Omega gun. And now we're making our way to the Omega gun. The Omega gun is also another one of those devices to where we have to physically sit in a chair, pull down a scanner type thing so we can control a robot and move the bullet.
Catherine makes it. She's like, "Oh, this could be really easy." Like and so like that. To be a second, they're like, "What am I doing here?" Like, "Oh, okay, there it is." Boy, I feel. I hope that wasn't supposed to be super easy because boy, it got me for a second. I was like, "What am I controlling? What am I supposed to be clicking on?"
Yep. I guess we missed one other little bit that's going to lead into this. So Simon's still at this point. Spence and I have been mentioning this entire podcast. Simon is just a fucking idiot. The dude just cannot get it. He does not understand. All throughout Omicron, there's a lot of dialogue between him and Catherine about like, oh, how do we get on the Ark? How do we get uploaded onto the Ark or whatever, you know? And Catherine comes up with a plan that because of the way that the WoW was able to scan people as they're sitting in these chairs and controlling, like robots and whatnot. Catherine has the same idea. She goes, you're going to sit in that chair. You're going to move the armature device into the gun. And during its launch sequence is when I'll scan both of us. We'll upload into the Ark, and then it fires off, and we'll be good, So that's in Simon's mind this whole time. So he sits down, he gets to the gun. He sits down, he controls the arm device, sets the bullet into the gun or whatever, and then starts to prime it. And then a countdown timer starts to happen. You get scanned real quick or whatever, and you see 2 progress bars. There's one for Catherine and one for Simon. And there's like a 20-second timer.
And this is the part, too, that they're like, because, this whole time it's like, I still always kind of wonder, I'm like, is Catherine going to like turn at some point? Like, she just almost felt sometimes too nice and too optimistic and so on like that. And it just reminded me, like, when you see Catherine's bar load up really fast, like just a big old, like she flips the bird. See you later.
Yep. I'm out.
Because it's like, that's what I felt like. I just needed somebody to carry me the whole way. And then you see Simon's bar and it's like loading really slow. Like he's trying to log on to like dial up internet or something like that.
Exactly. Got that old 56K modem.
And you're watching the timer go down. It's actually getting kind of like, oh shit, because I was kind of wondering, like, what type of, because in my mind I was going like, what type of ending are they going to go with right here? That was literally what I was thinking. And this is one of those points you could go with a lot of different endings, realistically. There's a lot of different choices you could go with. And I was kind of wondering, I'm like, what are they going to go with here? Is it going to be that? Is it going to be the one where Catherine's like, see ya, I'm out here. Like, I don't need you anymore. Here you go. Have an Omnicron.
Yep. Yeah. And this is, so Catherine gets uploaded. We're down to the last 10 seconds. Simon Bar, like Spence was saying, is really struggling to go. And then like about 1 second left, his finally uploads, scan goes pink, real quick or whatever. And then, your scanner basically pops up. You're looking at the screen in front of you and you see that the armature device is being fired and it's like flying out into space. And Simon gets all excited and he's like, yeah, we did it. And then sudden realization that, oh shit, he's still there. He's still sitting in that chair, and he gets mad at Catherine and he's just like, what the fuck? He's like, why are we not on there? And she's like, we are on there. We're there,
He's like, dude, seriously. Like, it's like one of those ones like, dude, what does mine say?
Yep.
It's one of those things. And she's like, we're on there. Copy, paste, not cut, cut, paste.
Yep. And then he just has this
like a mental breakdown.
And he just starts screaming at her, fuck you, fuck this place, what is going on, blah, blah, blah. And he gets mad. And it's at this point, like, this is probably one of the scariest parts of the game for me. And it has nothing to do with jump scares, has nothing to do with something chasing you or, monster design, anything like that. It's literally you sitting there being upset that you didn't get transferred onto the Ark. The facilities around you are shutting down. Lights are going out left and right. It's getting darker and darker in this facility or whatever.
There goes all the power.
You're screaming at Catherine. And Simon just hits the console in front of him, killing Catherine, essentially. Like, popping her out of existence. And then he has that realization of like, oh fuck, I just killed her, and he's staring at that screen, and again, like lights in the distance, just chunk, 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 just like coming down. And then all of a sudden he's sitting there in utter darkness, and he's just, and the last words of the game are just like, Catherine, and then it just like fades to black, and then credits roll, and then there's an epilogue after the fact, But
let's talk about this ending first, and then we can get to the part 2, because it is one of those ones like one of those ones. Like, I mean, I couldn't help but laugh because of how much he was freaking out, and it's just because it's just like, because he just doesn't get it. But then at the same time, if you think about it, it's like this dude already, in a sense, if you kind of went through the game, you most likely killed just about everything along the way, and now you have nobody. You killed the chick that had the the Ark. You killed Catherine. Now you killed the WoW. You there's nothing left. You literally left yourself to die down here alone. And since you're a robot, who knows how long you might live?
Well, exactly, and that's the existentialism side of it. That is just, it's gut wrenching to think, and think about too, like you kept Simon 2 alive. So Simon 2 is still out there too, like floating around.
So in my world, I got 2 Simons. Well, that's the only people left. It's just 2 Simon. Well, I guess the monsters are left because you can't kill them. Yeah. But yeah, so there's 2. I left 2 Simons down there in my game.
It's just so dreadful to think of that, to be that alone, that deep, nowhere to go, nowhere to escape, nowhere to hide. And seemingly he will never get out of there because the facilities are shutting down. There's no power. You can't open doors without power.
And you're on the bottom. It's like, right. Good luck. You're not even going to be able to swim up without or anything like that.
Yep.
If there was power and the Omni jail and all that stuff, you could get probably Simon's probably not bright enough to get creative, but you could get creative and probably create a way to get back on. Because I feel like, once again, if he's a robot, he might be able to start walking on the earth at some point, as time went on. Because if you're a robot and you live for a couple hundred years plus, for however long your battery, I guess, goes. Yeah. You could, because I was thinking of it like in an optimistic way, like if you were able to become robots down here, especially with the WoW and everything like that. Sure. And if the WoW started designing robots actually properly and not like junk ones, and actually put them together like with decent mechanics, the robots could eventually come back up to the surface of the earth, and it's, it would be fine. It would just be frozen and kind of destroyed from, the meteor, but they could survive that harsh climate.
Yep. Well, in this scene too, like especially the realization side of when Simon realizes that he's still sitting in that chair, because leading up to this point, every scan that Simon has gone through for us as the player, from Dr. Munchie's office to waking up in the random facility, from Simon 2 sitting down to just waking up in Simon 3's body, and whatnot. This is the first time where you go through a scan and you just like nothing happens, like you're still sitting in that chair. Dreadful, dude, just completely dreadful. It really, that's the type of horror that I really enjoy, because there's no real way to describe it, because it's deep internal within me, as a actual human on this earth, it's just like,
well, you know what it really is like? It's like a Twilight Zone episode. That's kind of how this ending totally is. It reminds me of, there's literally that old episode where there's the dude who loves to read and whatnot, and then he becomes the last guy on Earth and whatnot, and he's like, and he's collecting all these books and everything like that, and then he drops his glasses and they break.
Yep.
So he can't read anymore, and he's the last person left. It reminds me of that kind of thing. So that's where I think it's kind of a cool Twilight Zone ending, like almost. And it says that's what this game is. It's like a ginormous Twilight Zone episode. Yep. Of just a bizarre post-apocalyptic alternative world and whatnot. And this Simon 3 is left here. Now, granted, if we watch the credits and you get to the end, you get the super happy ending post-credits where Simon 4 is like, see you later. And then he ends up on the Ark that kind of reminds me almost like the Halo, where it's just like this giant Earth planet thing where everything's all dialed in and nature looks great and everything like that. And he finally sees an actual form of Catherine up there and whatnot. And I kind of always wonder, it's like, Simon, he's Simon, so he's probably, is, mentally strong as he is. But Catherine knows all what's going on. She's, she's part of this whole project and so on like that. And it's that thing that's like, you shoot the Ark and it's like this little box thing and so on like that. So technically, it's almost like if you shot your PC tower into space, is pretty much what the Ark is, and it pops out with its solar panels and everything like that. And it's just floating through, and hopefully
I thought it was a really cool scene. So like Sven says, like we awaken as Simon 4 now, like on the Ark or whatever. There's one other bit that we forgot about that exists right here on the Ark, right at the end. So as you're kind of going through the serene environment, and it's very heavily implied, like it has a lot of religious tones in terms of like what is heaven, like what does that look like, and like that's what the Ark more or less is like. It never goes into like Christianity and like religion and stuff like that. It doesn't do that at all in this game, and for good reason. But it's heavily implied that that's like kind of what the Ark actually is,
The best way to say it's like science heaven in a sense, where like if you pretty much fabricated what would be the sweetest place to live. Oh, it's gonna have great green grass, it's gonna be blue skies, it's gonna have all kind of. We'll be like you're at the park all day long. The weather's controlled. It's like living on the Halo thing.
Oh yeah,
exactly. Well, this is one thing I also want to bring up too. Is there's a thing. It happens twice in this game. It happens like when you kind of like first wake up and you realize that you're kind of a robot and so on like that, and there's a questionnaire thing, and it doesn't do
survey.
anything.
That's what I was going to mention. Yep.
It's just there for the player, and then the same thing when you finally get to the arc and whatnot, it has a survey. And of course, the way I answered both of them is I answered them pretty darn optimistic. I'm like, oh sweet, we're gonna be robots. We transfer into here, like like, continue on. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like I could become like RoboCop. Yeah, okay, cool. And then the same way when I was on top of that, I'm like, cool, I made it to the arc. Like, I don't know, everything's great. It all worked out. We made it through. Screw Simon 2 and 3.
So I would love to see the developer side of that, because I guarantee that that's a data collection pool for them, to kind of like test their players as they go through the game and whatnot. Because it's similar. The first survey that you can take in the game or whatever, I was very optimistic on first playthrough, not knowing shit about the game. I was very optimistic that like, yeah, Simon's going to get out of this. Like we're gonna transfer the arc. We're gonna move on. Like humanity's going to survive forever and blah blah blah. But upon reaching this section of the game on first run, I was morally broken. Like at this point, like, because again, it's a question of what is real, what is human, what is, like, is 4 copies over of Simon at this point, like, good, like, is like that Gingy guy, the video I sent you, I think he explained it really well, that where he didn't have any connection to this Simon. It's the exact same Simon as before. It's the same person. It's the same character. It's the same wants and needs and ambitions. But this is Simon 4. We built a relationship with Simon 2 and Simon 3 at this point, like, and now Simon 4 just like feels very foreign to us. And,
well, it's weird because Al says he mentioned that in that video, and I was like, I felt like it was, in a sense, it was just the same. It was just literally the same copy, so I didn't feel like he was any other different Simon. And his copies are made. It'd be different if Simon 4 was a restart, where it was actually like the way that we woke up as Simon 2. If that was what Simon 2, he almost reverted to his first save state. Yeah. And then he appeared on the arc, I would say that would be kind of foreign. But since we've gone along, and it's literally, this is the best way to describe it. It's literally like when we were playing Parasite Eve, and you save right before you switch the disc. That's how I sort of feel like. And you go in, it's like, is that Abrea of disc 1 the same as Abrea as disc 2?
Oh, sure.
And so, like, when he said that comment, I was like, well, that's kind of weird. I'm like, it's like, to me, it's just like he transferred over. I mean, I think we note them as Simon 1, 2, 3, and 4 as you've kind of progressed on, but I've kind of looked at it like it's a continual file that keeps getting passed along. As I said, if it reverted back to Simon 2, like from the very beginning, I would be like, oh, okay, well, this now feels foreign because now you have a Simon who didn't experience anything. So he doesn't have any like knowledge. He literally went to the hospital in 2015 and woke up. He's like, whoa, shit, I'm on the arc? What the hell happened? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That I think would be different. But since he did carry through, I felt like that is still the same Simon. And hopefully now he won't bitch about getting like a 4th time at life.
Yeah, exactly. It's just funny to me that even that version of Simon, after being told so many times, copy paste, not cut and paste, because he doesn't mention anything, because that version of Simon just assumes that he was transferred, onto the arc, and then has zero thought or anything. That it has no idea that Simon 3 is stuck at the base of the fucking ocean,
which is weird because there was Simon 2. That's the kind of like the only like logic gaps in like Simon is that you would really think, and then this scene's really short. Like I almost kind of wish this last scene was a little bit longer because I feel like it would be interesting to see. And I get it, they want you to kind of fill in the blanks, but I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more like post story, kind of just to fill that in there, because it should be one of those ones like, wait a second. I'm saying like he should kind of have a realization that he is Simon 4 because he knows that Simon 2 exists. You know what I mean? And he knows that Simon 1 exists and is dead. Yeah. Because he found the note. So it's like, it's all there. It's not like he didn't find this. That's almost like the thing is if you want to have a real, like, more of a twist thing is realizing that, like, oh, we left everybody behind. And Captain be like, yeah, whatever. I got clubbed over the head with a wrench. Like, I'm pretty grateful to be up here. Let's be honest.
Exactly. But I think that, so after we take that survey, we physically find Catherine, like in a real form, she's in a body at this point. And she basically just like waves and, Simon starts to walk up to her, it fades to black, and then it like cuts. I love this scene, dude, because so you see the arc, you see the satellite thing that it's on, you see the solar arrays that are sticking out of it or whatever, and it's like a very close-up shot of it, and it says like Pathos 2 on the side and whatever, and it's like slowly starting to pull back and pull back and pull back, and then all of a sudden then you see Earth, you see the bit of Earth, like the part of the hemisphere of it or whatever, and it's just decimated. Everything's on fire,
covered in smoke. Yeah.
And it's such a, because it's showing the universe, more or less, as it's slowly pulling away from this, little, object, the arc. And then all of a sudden you see like some thrusters just, pss, 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 and then it just starts to just take off into the stars or whatever. And then like, it's like, the camera's kind of following it, kind of cuts a little bit more over to Earth a little bit. And it's just kind of like waving like back and forth like that. And then everything just slowly kind of fades to black. And then it's the proper ending of the game, and then you're back to the menu again.
At least it wouldn't be like the super bad ending where it shows that scene, it's slowly flying out there, comet comes by, hits it. All that work you did.
All that for nothing.
I see. That's the thing is, I would give them props no matter what ending they went with this, because there's so many ways you can go, and it's like you can go with like a real optimistic ending, you could go with a super happy ending, you could go with an ultra dark ending, you can almost go with such like a hard turn that almost makes it kind of like comedic in a weird way, just because it's you go through all that just to piss the players off by blowing the arc up.
Yep. Yeah, I think that I'm really, really glad that we got to play this game, because it's the type of game that just, once you go through its narrative, because it kept me up for a long time, like after my first play experience of this game of just thinking and thinking and thinking, and like, it got me to play it again and again, and now the fourth time, for this podcast, and the amount of shit that I've learned every single time I play this game. I find the new note. I miss the thing on the wall last time, and like, I'm just learning more and more. There is so much to talk about in this game. And like, even, I mean, we've been rolling for 2.5 hours at this point. Like, I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface of like the totality of what is actually happening in Soma. And thank God that there's like, videos out there in the world that you can just watch, like, because otherwise we would sit here for 10 hours if we were to go through every little bit, but
we would go the length of the game.
yeah, exactly. But I think that it's just such a unique experience, and the writing is so good, the characters are so well written, the overall plot is very good. I think the thing that I enjoy the most about it is that like all of your choices, all of the things that happen in this game of like where Simon has an A or B option, none of it matters. Like literally none of it. You can kill the thing or not kill the thing. You can, move on to the next section or not. You can do this, that, and the other, I love that about the game, because it doesn't feel like it's a game about Simon. It's a game about me as the player, my mental psyche, and how I would handle that type of situation. And it opens up a lot of conversation for individuals to actually talk about this game, because we're all different, because we're all human, and just heavy themes surrounding that,
No, yeah, and I'm kind of glad that we sat down and played this one, because as I said, if it was me by myself just looking at this game, I would have read the description, I would have saw that like, oh, you don't fight back and everything like that, and I probably would have started the game up, and when I got to like that first enemy and saw that was what was going to happen, I would have been like, yeah, I got other games to play, and that's what would have happened. I know for a fact that's how it was, but sometimes it's kind of that nice thing that because we're doing the podcast, you're like, well, I got to go all the way through it, and so on like that. But because of that being like a little bit more forced into it, you get that experience, and that's where I think really stands out is that story in itself is very cool. I liked it a lot. I love just the robot interaction and so on like that. I think the idea of being able to copy yourself into a robot is cool. Even though that, like, of course, the robots that are made in this one are made kind of junky. I like to assume that we'll get cooler robots that will be like RoboCop. That's what I want. I want like Alex Murphy, realistically. Or at least can be copied into like a T-800 or something like that from Terminator. But just the notion of that, and as I said, the Catherine character, because that was the character I could relate to like the whole way through, where I've always felt like Simon was just the goober who you just were playing as your like main guy who's like way too emotional, like and so on like that. But Catherine is the one I really liked because it felt like she was so practical. You know, she knew she was about getting the mission done, you know, preserving humanity pretty much as literally a textbook at the end of the day. That's pretty much what it would be, you know, except, you know, some alien race would find and be like, I can't plug this into my computer. I don't know how this hard drive works. You know, but like,
Firewire, what is that?
yeah. What did they still use Firewire? Jesus. Oh, hey.
USB 3.0? What the fuck?
Oh, everything's running on a Macintosh? Oh, no, we're not going to be able to do anything of this. Yeah. Oh, it says by Steve Jobs. That means it's got proprietary hardware now. So, you know, I just think that concept's cool. I like the idea of just thinking about where it kind of goes to. Like, you know, here's this thing floating in space. You know, it's like our real life version of that arc is the Starship Voyager 1 and 2 that I think was released in 77 and 78, if I'm not mistaken. And those are those ones that, and this is the coolest thing I think, is like those ships were launched in the 70s. They are out there past Pluto by this point. They've left the galaxy. They left the galaxy, I think, like 5 years ago. They still send a transmission back, and it only takes, I think, like 35 minutes to send a transmission back and forth to Earth. That is mind-blowing, in my opinion,
crazy.
for 70s technology. Those are the ones, too, they got, like, the data disc on it, and it's in, like, a big old... It looks like a giant LP, and it's got all, like, the human history type stuff, and then for some reason it's got, like, some Beatles songs, and a couple other, like, random things at, like, the time. They're like, here you go. Here's a picture of, like, Richard Nixon, you know? I always think that those things are so cool, and that literally is legitimately what this arc is in the game. It's just, here's just the more, like, you know, 150 years or whatever in the future from now, in a sense, where we could be at, you know, even if we do get struck by a meteorite, we can still carry on at least the data. And to me, I know that, like, some people go like, well, is that really human? I'm like, well, at the end of the day, I think preserving the data is the most important part. You know, I think that we are actually not that far off in a sense of humans being obsolete. I don't, and I know that sounds kind of, some people look at that dark. I don't look at that dark. I call that like evolution. And I think that like only in a couple hundred years, the robots is the new evolution.
Oh, 100%.
And in a sense, the robots are the ones that are going to carry on these legacies because the human body is too fragile. I mean, even like they say space travel and so on like that won't be done by human bodies. You will transfer your mind is the only way you can do it and so on like that. Whether that be something that you transfer your mind, maybe you still exist as a human, but maybe you transfer your mind into a robot that you kind of control in a sense, and you could send yourself off in the deep space, you know, so much of that stuff. And, you know, I don't know, I'm very pro robot anyway. So like, I like all the core ideas of that.
Well, and that's, I think it plays well into this game because it is so grounded in reality. But this situation can happen, you know, I mean, like there's some like weird sci-fi stuff, you know, like the Omnigel and, you know, things like that. But
even the kind of the monster robots and so on, I feel like once again, it's like, I like to assume that like the AI would make some better robots than that.
Oh, sure. But I think in general, just like this environment, a catastrophic event happening, you know, us building on the base of the ocean floor, like all that type of stuff is like totally within the realm of reality, you know. And I think it just makes it that much more real, which also adds to this existentialism of the game. And again, like I don't feel that Soma is a scary game per se in terms of its design and monsters and things like that. It's outright terrifying because it gets you to think again, what is human, what is real. Know, I love that.
It gets you like I would actually say it is still pretty scary. I mean, like, you know, because, you know, sometimes it is that thing like, what is truly scary? Is it like a cheap jump scare? Is that what's considered scary? Or is it like when you literally get like that kind of thing where you think about a situation, you go, oh shit, talk about being stuck at the bottom of the ocean and you know you can't get back to the surface and you got to be along with a bunch of these other people who you may or may not be able to trust type thing, you know. I think that sometimes to me is like, I would say is more scary than anything else. It's kind of like the same thing when we played Parasite Eve. Yes, there's not really much like jump scares and things of that nature in it and things chasing you down, but just the whole idea when you think of the concept of it and you go, just imagine that like, you go to literally this like opera, and you watch everybody melt or burn away or something like that, like that kind of stuff in itself, and being absorbed into things. And it's no real different than actually Soma. I mean, these people are being absorbed into like half cyborg, half organic human thing, and fusing together and going from being able to be a fully functional robot to being literally nothing but something stuck on the wall now,
right?
Just barely like breathing and so on like that. And some dick guy coming in throwing objects at you because he can.
Yep. Absolutely.
But no, I think that this experience is definitely one of those ones. And I know we talked about this in such great detail and length. And just like I said at the very beginning, you can hear this whole story. I don't think it takes away from actually playing through it. I don't think so. And for me, I've always been one of those people anyways. Like, somebody could tell me the ending of a movie, and it's like, well, I haven't watched the movie yet. So, yeah, you might somewhat spoil something, but I didn't see the whole lead up to it. I don't see the scenes. I don't get to interact with the characters and so on like that. If anything, I would hope that even if you hadn't played this game before, you could listen to something this long and being like, oh, shit, I got to check this out. Like, if you obviously had to talk about it for this long, it's got to be something.
Oh, yeah. No, 100%, and... yeah, I'm just, I don't know. I'm stoked that we got to play this. When we first talked about, starting this podcast, back in December, last year or whatever, like Soma was always on my mind, but I always knew that like you just didn't like these style games or whatever. Thank you for taking the time to play through it. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got some good takeaways from it. Like I just think it's a beautiful experience. I really enjoyed it through and through. There's a reason why I've played it a handful of times. And again, especially being in a genre that I genuinely don't enjoy, the hide and seek mechanics of this genre, like really don't enjoy that. But this game in particular is just, I don't know, it hits every button for me. It's very good.
Well, and I even feel this is one of those games too. Like, even if I went to go play it again, I probably would maybe just throw it on that like story mode or whatever and just cruise through it, because that's really what I feel like is almost like it's the main reason you're there anyways, is to go through that adventure and so on like that. And the monsters are kind of like, I almost kind of even thought about too throughout it. It's like, is like, could you do this game and actually not have any of the monster like hunt down kind of scenes in a sense?
Yep.
And I think you totally could, because once again, I'm going to go back to Myst or Riven or any of those ones. Like, I think it could be in that same style where it's just literally a walk around, you click things, you solve puzzles, you figure more and more of this mystery out, where you are, and so on like that. I think that's more what the game is. And I know that maybe it's one of those weird ones that they, it's that weird thing. If you make a game like that, especially kind of nowadays, it kind of feels like, should we throw a little bit of gameplay stuff in there beyond just walking around and clicking stuff, And I think that's where they felt like, maybe we'll throw these monsters in here and so on.
Yeah.
But
I think you can completely get rid of them.
I think you could kind of get rid of them, and that's where I think that almost a lot of times I think that probably story mode or easy mode, whatever you want to call it, might not be the worst way to go with this one. In fact, I think if I played it again, I think I would just go with that, because it's like it's one of those ones, I like the idea of being able to explore and not having to worry about, it's only like maybe 5 or 6 times in this entire game that something's kind of there, but like sometimes it's like, oh, there's this stupid guy again. Okay, I'm gonna walk over here. As I said, a lot of times that stuff it's less scary and more just kind of obnoxious, than anything else. That might be the way to go, but no, as I said, the way I liked about this one is it wasn't one of those games where if that creature ran into you, it was a cutscene and boom, there you go, revert to your last save, because that would have killed it for me if that was probably the case.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and same for me. Like, there's no way I would have played through this all those years ago, Yeah, I mean, I just think, like, in general, just like the monsters of this game, like, again, they add a certain element that I like to think of as just panic horror. I think that's their core function, is just to add tension. But no, I 100% think you could totally get rid of that, because that's not the primary horror of the game. The primary horror of the game is being stuck down in Pathos 2 in the bottom of the ocean, knowing that something bad happened on the surface of Earth, and you got to try to save humanity. That's the horror of the game. So I'd say to viewers, if you've sat through this amount of time, I'm sure you probably understand a lot more about this game than you did when you first started. But
yeah, boy, I understand a lot more about this game than when I played through it already. Because I felt like that was one of those ones when we first started. I'm like, I'm going to be the guy that has a lot of questions. I can just see this, because I definitely got the first time experience, but there's so much to take in from it. But Yeah, I would definitely say go check Soma out. I hope somebody does put this together for a VR because boy, is this game set up so well for that VR experience. Yeah, it'd be pretty scary and so on. I'm definitely not denying that, but it's just so designed. It felt like it blew my mind that it actually was not a VR game because it just felt like I was legitimately playing a VR game that for some reason got converted to a console game. You know, in a weird way. And these are the kind of things that I think that I know it's a little bit off topic, but I think these are the things that what VR needs to do is take an already established good game and then convert that into VR. You know, I think that's almost more important than trying to make VR first games. It's like, no, just take games that are already really good for VR, you know, like this game would be perfect. The same way that they did with Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 is a perfect example of like, it's already an amazing game as is. You convert it to VR and you're like, oh, this is so badass. It's like now I'm in the total world and so on. And they're doing it here and there, but I feel like they could be doing a lot more. You don't even make any new VR games. Just make old games into VR. That's what you need to do.
Yeah, just convert it, please.
But Soma's I feel like Soma doesn't need anything. It's just that you just need to add like hand controls for your like Quest remote. That's the only thing it needs, and you would have the whole VR experience.
Yeah, which seems like it would be easy enough. I mean, there's not much, you know, like in terms of mechanics in general to begin with. So like, I can't imagine it'd be that difficult to do. But some modder eventually will get to it. Yeah, I'd say, you know, especially right now, you know, we're sitting here in June of 2025, and right at tail end, Steam sales are up until July 10th, and the game is $5.99 right now on Steam.
Yeah, can't beat that. And it could be also, there's, you know, summer sales for everybody. So it might be on Xbox, might be on PlayStation,
sure.
Might even be on Switch. I don't even know if it could be on there. But yeah, you know what I mean? So it's well worth finding it. Check for $5.99. Hell of a deal. You know, I mean, I guess I got it on PlayStation Plus. So, but even still, it's like, dude, that's so worth it for the experience. So, yeah, I would say 100% go out of the way, check this out. This was one of the coolest stories that I think we've even went through on any of the video games we've played, you know. Yeah, it's one of those ones I know I'll be thinking about this game a lot more throughout time and so on like that. And we even learned that there's some spin-offs and so on. Like Cameron found like there's literally a video series or what is it, even a TV series or something that's literally
it looks
put together.
like some kind of episodic something or other, but like a web series from Frictional Games actually created like a live action series, I assume leading up to the launch of the game. I don't know the history behind it, but it's like 8 episodes or something like that I found on YouTube.
I'm curious to see if that's like a prequel or something like that. Is that like a Catherine story and everything? That's actually could be pretty sweet, you know. Yeah, I think I'd have to check that out. And wasn't there, I thought there was one other thing that we found that was kind of like a tie-in. Maybe I'm just making that up now.
No, I just know the that web series. There's a lot of really good in-depth analysis videos out there. That last one I sent you, I'd highly recommend it, especially now that you know quite a bit more about the game. It's about an hour and a half, but and I forgot the creator's name, but anyways, that's a really good video. I'd highly recommend watching that. It'll explain a lot more about everything leading up to you taking over Simon, you know, and even he explains Simon's story too, but everything leading up to it, you'll learn so much about what's actually going on with that facility, Pathos 2, the world, all that. So
yeah, really that's cool. I mean, it even makes me kind of interested in playing some of this company's other games because I know of them, but I've never played any of them. Yeah. So
I liked Amnesia is really good. That is deep psychological horror though. That's a different type of game. I mean, it's the same style game in terms of like run and hide, you know, type mechanics, and like, you know, same thing. You know, everything has a lot of weight to it and very, you know, physics and whatnot. You know, it's just a different type of horror, like getting into your head type horror. So
yeah, it still makes me interested, you know, because as I said, I like this experience way more than I even thought. And yeah, I'm just glad we've kind of played through it. But yeah, beyond all that good time stuff, you can always find more Silent Evil episodes on Old Man Orange Podcast. Check that out on either YouTube or Spotify. Till then, I'm Spencer Scott Holmes.
And I am Cameron.
And we'll see you some other time.